Good morning or evening, everyone. Welcome back to Mandala, a most prestigious program today, as we are joined by Herman Kellogg, the mastermind behind the hottest group right now, the Cornflakes. How are you doing today, Mr. Kellogg?
Yeah, not too bad. Swimming in sugar makes it taste better.
As one does, as one does. I'd like to just briefly ask you a couple of questions before we move into the choices for today. You as our guest
Yeah,
programmer.
fire away.
Well,
Who wants to be a millionaire?
Well, initially, I was curious as to how you felt as though these accusations that the group were had reactionary attitudes toward the process of unions that kind of whole 1980s moment of the coal miners. Like you were taking a more reactionary stance to the politics of Arthur Scargill at the time. Like what was
Well, we decided to tax the places where they were striking, as in the strike, the land they were on, just to really rub it in. I'm a firm believer in poll tax, especially where cereal's concerned. It's just natural, right?
Well, I guess what people were curious about was that these events ended in the 1980s. We were just very curious as to why the group was insistent upon.
Oh, well, we still, employ strike breakers and people to bust unions now, big techs in that little moment. And so that's where we get most of our, employment these days. It's not from mines. That's a bit antiquated. That's for, India and Ethiopia. That's where the mines are. We bust the Tesla office, You want to unionize? Boom, we're there.
Interesting.
Better watch out, Elon.
Well, and what would you say to these rumors that you were inspired by the writings of Michel Foucault on your latest release, which was considered to be one of the more prominent trap albums of the last 4 years?
For who? Nah, man. The only person I was inspired by was Macaulay Culkin and the Pizza Underground. That's where I've gotten all my artistic inspiration. So maybe he's doing a piss up on your Foucault. But I don't know, I'm more of a Derrida kind of guy,
And then just one more rumor we'd like to quickly address was this is wishful thinking perhaps, but is there any truth to this legend that you've been wanting to work on a hip hop concept album of Umberto Lenzi's 1983 Sword and Sandal caveman classic Iron Master?
Oh, I finished it. All done. MF Vood.
When's this going to drop? If you go back up,
it'll
got a lot of viewers here. Breaking news, guys.
It'll drop in 1996. This one's going back a bit.
Yes. This will be. This isn't the first time that the Cornflakes have claimed for the release of some 1996, despite no one having heard it until 2022.
Yeah, but if you think about it, it was always there.
Is this a reference to Kubrick's The Shining, perhaps?
Well, The Shining's pretty apt because it's more of a reference to Foxhead Stalked This Land by the Close Lobsters. I never thought about it, but this album does share a weird mental space with The Shining.
And do share that with us.
Yeah, this is an album which I guess I first heard of this band because of, the C86 compilation.
Sure.
There's NME tapes, I suppose. I'm not that familiar in how it happened. I think it was one of their interns or something was given a little job to collect, cassettes that were being shared through the mail with indie bands, mostly from Northern England and Scotland. And this band, I guess, ended up on the compilation that was called C86. And it's weird that a whole subgenre has been named after this one compilation, even though much to my surprise, years later I found out there's C87, C88. It goes off into the 90s. I swear there's a C94. The 86, if it wasn't obvious, is for the year 1986.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a band that for years was kind of in the back of my mind. And then a couple of years ago, I just decided, I was one day, I guess I'd listened to enough of the Stone Roses' first album. I'm what else is there? And then I was I remember there was something on C86 called Close Lobsters that was interesting. So I listened to this album and I was man, where has this been all my life? Because it's just, I I don't know. This is what the fourth or fifth jangle pop album I've probably selected for this show.
Something like that, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're somewhat unconscious, just because I suppose like the picks have been like I've mostly like sort of picked things that marry the sort of worlds of pop music and rock music, and then various electronics and stuff like that. But in broad strokes, the worlds of rockism and poptimism, right? And like somehow I feel that jangle pop sort of occupies a nice space between those two worlds.
Yeah.
Because you get the sort of, you know, ramshackle rock and roll guitar stuff at the same time as having these incredibly melodic, beautifully like arranged and harmonious vocal performances, and, you know, short, concise, like melodic songs that captures, the best of both worlds, I feel. And this album is a great example of that, because like just the sort of constant like chiming of the guitars, the interesting bass work that sort of rolls around it, and then sort of, you know, propelling drumming that's just constantly propelling you forward. It really is like it's such an oral like exercise. Like I think it could sort of evoke different imagery in sort of people differently. But for me, this sort of puts you into that place that's the sort of the best jangle pop does, I feel, where it's a sort of like, it's strange that this is all being done within like pop and rock music, but I feel that all these bands are like aiming for a sort of oral Arcadia, like a sort of, they had a genuinely utopian vision of where this sort of music could put you and how it can alter like mind space and your psychoactivity and stuff like that. And there's a sort of like it's where, like, I just find it so interesting that it was like a little moment that happened through the mid 80s into like maybe the early 90s, where all these like bands that were derived from punk rock and probably grew up listening to hard rock and stuff like that.
Glam rock.
And then glam, more specifically, yes, definitely. Especially in the case of England, which was kind of their hard rock. And they were kids when the psychedelic pop music was huge in the 60s, like the late 60s. So you get such a blending of all those three worlds into this concise like sound, and it feels like the whole summation of British pop music. Before, like, I don't mind Britpop, but it just sort of becomes a bit plain and more like looking to America by that point. Whereas even though there's American jangle, the American jangle feels like it's looking to England. Whereas, and that's where the bands would try to become popular, in the American like alternative rock scene in the 80s and stuff. And I just feel that like it's such a blending of popular music post Beatles, and it almost perfects that, you know, pure pop Beatles moment. And this album is just a perfect example of that, I feel. Like, honestly, it's a genuinely sort of utopian space. And at least like 3 or 4 of the songs are all classics of the genre, or just classics of music in general, I feel. And then they'll space those sort of, you know, more ballady or jangly songs out with sort of punk rock ditties that make the album flow nicely, and sort of you don't get stuck in one mode the whole time. It's like fairly inventive for a genre that, done at its like most like half-assed, can be very samey. That's the one sort of down of it. If it's not done by like a very intricate songwriter, it can feel a bit like it's just someone who loves this aesthetic that I think evokes in a lot of people, but definitely evokes in myself, and they're trying to maybe capture it a bit too, like, not subtly enough, you know. But yeah, it's just something about chiming rhythm guitar that just, it really speaks to the sort of ethereal quality of, like, you know, music and one's relation to music. Plus, it's got an enigmatic as hell title, and that sort of weaves its way through all the sort of adventures and, you know, lyrical places on the album. Like an interesting song about, like, I think the sort of quasi-title track it's weird. It feels like it's like a road trip song through Australia. He even talks about boomerangs, but then he also mentions going through the Tropic of Cancer. But I think he might be confusing it with the Tropic of Capricorn. I'd love to ask the guy. But yeah, that's how I feel about this album.
Maybe it flowed better as a lyric. Maybe.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, like that's how I feel about the album itself. I was having sort of interesting thoughts about at least my relationship to it earlier today. But if you want to chime in quickly with your thoughts, please.
I was just going to quickly suggest that in the Jangle world, the English folk revival moment is kind of seems like an ingredient as well. The sort of troubadour tradition full circle. We talked about Nick Jones a couple of shows ago, for example,
and they all love like Nick Drake as well.
Yeah,
all the Jangle artists. So that's definitely true. I forget the English folk revival as well. Certainly.
I'll quickly say as well. Yeah, this is a killer little thing, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not an aficionado of Jangle pop, but I pretty much, when I think of it, I do pretty much like all the major acts of the genre. Maybe there are a few exceptions. And that's why I was actually curious to ask you, like, which groups, maybe of the big, what are the biggest groups that you think fall short either of the epoch or if that have attempted to revive the aesthetic since then, if there's any major ones in your mind?
I noticed on Our Way, and one of the highest rated is that band The Sundays, their album, and I remember listening to that once, and it was okay, but it didn't leave a huge impression on me, and I've never really gone back that much, so I'm surprised that it's so highly rated.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a meme to rip on, and I've never listened to the whole album, just that big song, and it's American, the Mazzy Star shit. I'm just like, that's for someone else.
Okay,
so I've sort of left that alone, you know.
Yeah.
But they're two fairly big bands within the genre.
Mazzy Star, I hear a lot about them.
Yeah, I think they were fairly popular.
I have listened to Mazzy Star. I don't remember disliking it. Not as good as like another band we're going to talk about. You bring up later.
Sure. Yeah, nice. But yeah, no, you know what's strange? I was listening to a bit of this album this morning, like hanging out with an old mate, and we just got into the discussion of, like, I suppose music consumption. And he was like a DJ sort of guy in the 80s, worked in music magazines, and then in the early 90s worked at like a record company and stuff. And funnily enough, he was mentioning a point that like another mate of mine was talking about once, which must be a sort of dialogue on the internet to do with tastemakers and things like that within music. And I guess he was a bit sort of bummed that the younger generation or what have you don't have that sort of immediate material sort of place to go to as far as like underground music recommendations go. Like you could talk to DJs or record store people back in the day. Like he had
itself.
Yeah. Like he had a story about this one guy in New Zealand who was just the guy who'd be like, yeah, this is the punk record you got to get. Mm-hmm. And he'd be telling all the people and stuff like that. And it's interesting because he also brought up that sort of idea that apparently exists of like, and I don't think he had any knowledge of it, some idea that an overabundance of choice leads people to like be frozen in what they can choose. And that's been like a sort of criticism of digital music and stuff like that. There's so much choice that maybe people get caught up, and that could be true to like sort of general human psychology. It makes sense in a way, but at least for myself, I can appreciate so hard these days that there is that overabundance of choice. My subjective reaction to that is actually more of a positive one, in as far as like I was even saying at the start of this, if you've listened to the Stone Roses' first album enough, you can then just go and listen to the Close Lobsters a bunch. Yeah. And you can get, I think this might even be the year before that album, the Stone Roses one. I think this is 87.
Yeah, it says here.
So it's just interesting that, if I had bought the Stone Roses LP back then, I would have probably listened to it as much as I have now. But I wouldn't just be able to immediately pull out the Close Lobsters and listen to that instead for something new that is very similar but very different as well.
And even if you went to a record shop, like how many records would they have? Like, unless if depending on where you are, like, our context in Australia, like we didn't get that much.
Yeah, that's the thing. It would be very time consuming and like financially consuming to actually chase these things down back then.
Yes.
It's incredibly, like, I would personally find it soul crushing. I'm sure people back then found it really exciting. The few people who would have bothered to involve themselves that heavily or not, trying to uncover stuff. But I just sort of, yeah, I personally, like I said earlier, maybe there is something that's sort of raw and basic to human psychology where that's sort of a truism, but I feel that it might also be ingrained into the sort of the like momentum of like the way we've consumed music over the last 60 years has sort of ingrained that mindset in us, and we haven't fully adapted to digital music yet, or the digital consumption of music.
Yeah,
it's still so tied into this like material linear mechanism.
Yeah, like I'm young enough where, like, as far as I could tell, like, people were just pulling songs from thin air, so I just don't really attach music to a physical object. Like, we took CDs into the car, but like that's just because we didn't have the technology for USBs or Bluetooth or aux yet.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, and you play that same CD again and again and again, and you go, drove you. It's just no one could be fucked changing it.
Yeah, that definitely happened in cars a lot. Yeah.
Like, anyway, like, it's just one of these things where, like, I've overabundance of choice. Like, it's always exciting to see what does rise to the surface. Like, just go through YouTube. Just like, what you did in record shops back in the day, and you looked for an album out that you liked and you took a risk on it and you had to pay money. Well, this time you can go that on YouTube, go to a channel, so you go recommended videos, and you don't even have to pay money. Well, there's an internet bill, but I mean, you use internet for lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of everything now.
Yeah.
So, you just click on this. Oh, there's some dolphins here. I'm going to click on that.
Imagine if you had a toilet
good,
that was...
and win.
Imagine if you could buy like a smart toilet and you needed to be connected to Wi-Fi to flush it. And then the internet shut off and you can't even flush your own toilet.
I mean...
That would be a true dystopia.
Like, the day that happens, and like, I wouldn't even be surprised if that day arrives, and I'm just going to, like... I'm not even going to react to the day that...
Yeah, you got to laugh at that. Yeah, just be like, what?
I wouldn't even laugh. I would just, like... I don't know, it'd just be like, a bird flying by, like, oh yeah.
Jeez, yeah, that's...
Yeah, that's the world.
Memory.
It's like that Transmetropolitan comic book.
Nice.
Anyway, we're finished on this particular release, I assume?
Yeah, go to the next one.
Okay, really good stuff here. Close Lobsters, Foxhead Stalk This Land. Oh, just quickly, have you heard their other stuff? I was just quickly curious.
Yeah, I heard what the next album. Yeah, and I swear I posted that EP as well.
Oh,
where
yeah.
is an
What is there to smile about?
Yeah, what is there to smile about? That was really good as well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Excellent.
but
I'm going to see if that's back on YouTube. Cause...
Have you heard any of this 2020 album?
Nah, I can't say I have.
Okay.
Didn't even know they had a 2020 album.
Oh, yeah. Not many ratings here, but, it's out there. Anyway, I guess I'll move on to my first pick here. So, Vince Staples here with Big Fish Fury 2017. When this album dropped, I think he became very, very hot, and like everyone was kind of excited about him. He had a previous release, Summertime '06, which is from 2015. I've gone back and listened to that, and that one didn't strike me so much. I remember a friend of mine, it's no workshop for anyone who's seen our videos on this channel, he was all Vince Staples around this time.
Yeah.
And then... But I didn't hear much of Vince Staples after that from him or anyone else. I guess this FM album from 2018 wasn't so well received, nor was this self-titled from 2021. This 22 album, Ramona Park Broke My Heart, not so well received, but very recently, 2024, this is not Smell the Glove, it's Dark, or Blood Chase's the Black Album, it's Dark Times from Vince Staples. There is some text in the centre there, but it's very hard to read, I think. And this has been very well rated. So it has me thinking again about Big Fish Fury, which, look, I didn't listen to at the time. I heard of it at the time, or at least who Vince Staples himself. I don't think I heard anyone talk about an album specifically. I never saw this cover art, which if I'd seen it on YouTube or something, I definitely would have heard it before I had. But when I realised this was like a very well-rated album of the 2010s and of 2017. So I figured, yeah, like I'll give this a shot. I mean, that's you know, it's like looks like one of my ambient or vaporwave covers. That sounds good. I listen to that stuff and I thoroughly appreciate it. And wow, I can see why everyone adored this at the time. This is, and to this day, this is really fantastic. It's a beautiful artistic summation of the musical trends of that time into this consummate piece. Like it is that sort of, you know, even though we're supposed to be, in some people's musings, I think, moving on from the album, it's such an organic form to employ a set of music recordings without conforming to this old, you know, you see Sea and Tranquility bemoaning the demise of the album, but this thing's like 30 something minutes, and it's organically, it can be longer. Albums can be hours long if they want to now.
Yeah.
At 36 minutes, it just knows, it's just the culmination of some sessions, effectively, I think. That's what albums kind of are, or seasons in someone's existence. And so I'm just really floored that you have, you know, like in the 1980s, maybe people were promoting the LP to some degree as like, oh, it's a thing of the past, or concept albums, and it's more about the single and stuff. And a band that was all about singles, like a lot of non-album singles until comps, the Smiths, then put out this consummate Queen is Dead. And no one batted an eye. No one thought, oh, this is going too far in the Sgt. Pepper's Dark Side of the Moon direction.
Yeah.
This is just this perfect artifact of the times, to the point where it did become this sort of Sgt. Pepper's icon for a generation.
Sure,
and
yeah.
Enemy is the greatest album of all time, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
I always forget they did that.
Yeah, they turned it into one of those. And essentially for the 2010s, we have Vince Staples' Big Fish Fury, or Kanye West's The Life of Pablo, maybe. But this feels very post Yeezus, certainly, but also just because it was the year after post. And Life of Pablo did come up fairly early in 2016, although he updated it a few times.
Yeah.
And people were quite annoyed. There was a Guardian article, when our album's finished. It's like, I don't know, op-ed rather than article, I suppose. But, no, yeah, like Vince Staples' Big Fish Fury, one of the best things I've heard as far as 2010s albums are concerned, especially ones that were as mainstream as it was. Absolutely brilliant. Evokes some of my favourite electronic, popular, or maybe more subcultural genres of the 1990s UK electronic aesthetics. And I've also
a bit of trip hop.
Oh yeah, and I just want to say, like, in regard to the later, I haven't heard the new album yet because I'm thinking maybe I'm gonna, if I listen to it and I like it enough, I'll want to like talk about it on Mandala, and I don't want to have to wait too long because so I'm just like, I'll wait till I'm prepping for like set of releases for a show, and then I'll listen to it and see. Just because I like that, I want to have that first-hand perspective. That'd be kind of exciting, I think.
Yeah. No.
Though I didn't think that. I thought the 2021 album was okay, the self-titled, and Ramona Broke My Heart is pretty good. Granted, like nothing blew me away like Big Fish Fury, but that seems to be the general consensus. I guess I'm conforming to it here. Awesome to see that. Like, if anyone's a fan of. This isn't even, like, sometimes hip-hop falls into just being a genre of electronic music anyway, and, I mean, that was somewhat less the case in the 1990s when it was more, I guess it has such a sample-heavy genre was kind of electronic by default, but in comparison to what we knew of as electronic music, Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk and what trip-hop was, some of the jazz rap was distinct, and the more minimal gangster rap was distinct, but then sort of by the era of the 2000s, when there's those really dense productions from Cannibal Ox, and even on Jay-Z, College Dropout, Common, like Water for Chocolate's a very dense production.
Yeah, certainly.
So it kind of just falls into, like, what I'm trying to say is, I've always appreciated hip hop. I think it's a fun, exciting, and highly catchy, and very, sometimes you realize a bit later in life, well, by later, I mean, like maybe adolescence, not in childhood, but, a very great intellectual rigor to it, but also there was an extraordinary capacity for it to embody the best things of electronic music genres and modern digital production, certainly by the 21st century. A lot of production was digital by the 90s, to be fair. as well. And I always felt as though, I mean, not that there are, I don't know how many people, serious people, like, you know, have kind of had a bit of a, you know, wall up to against their ears for as very hip hop is concerned, but I'd find it very unfortunate that people who say were electronic music fans weren't giving hip hop a reasonable listen. You know what I mean? I can kind of understand if rock music fans don't like electronic music and they also don't like hip hop. Like, okay, that is what it is. But I don't know if there is that kind of birth that you know, between electronic music fans and hip hop fans. But it may as well be a shared audience, I suppose. Maybe there's a more instrumental bend to, you know, EDM, for example. But you know, to me, it's like sometimes I just feel like I'm listening to extraordinary electronic music, but you know, interspersed with some compelling verses from time to time. Anyway, I'll move it over to yourself.
And especially with something like this, like, or even like Life of Pablo, the ad-libs are very important. And as opposed to verses, it seems like ad-libs sort of took over after around this time.
Yeah.
And ad-libs are sort of essential for setting the mood and whatnot of said song. And this album, like, is very good at doing that. Like, there's such a sort of pervading, gloomy mood over it, I felt while listening to it, at least. And, yeah, like you said, I kind of like its little touches of the Britishisms of it, you know. Yeah. That's very interesting. But mostly it was just the sort of, like, this album felt kind of very stripped back in its production. Like, it's fairly minimal, and there's a lot of, like, space between it. And it's, like, sort of sparse, you know? Almost like when they would try to make, like, hip-hop albums with a live jazz band. It had that sort of feel to it. Something like also, you know, Guru, like Jazzmatazz. It reminds me of something like that, outside of the, like, at least the sound, how it's recorded and stuff like that, as opposed to how it's constructed.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, this album, it's sort of the mid-2010s, I guess, is an era of hip-hop I've neglected a bit.
Yeah.
Just because I feel it's gotten more idiosyncratic since.
Yeah.
But a lot of that might be to do with things like this album or The Life of Pablo, and probably about a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, what was that guy that you mentioned? I forget his name, but he is a huge rapper. Has that weird, like, psychedelic hip hop around this time.
Lil Ugly Mane?
Yeah, Lil Ugly Mane. Stuff like that as well. Sort of, I feel, led to the more interesting, like, recent stuff. Like I think your next pick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a couple of picks from that.
Yeah, the one after, yeah. Yeah, no, I'm sort of enjoying the direction that hip hop's going at the moment, especially in this world where, like I was saying before, there's this overabundance of choice. Like, it's not getting pigeonholed through the, like, I don't know, when did hip hop become the biggest, like, sort of commercial music? Like, technically it was 2011 or something, but through the mid to, like, late 90s when they really started marketing it, and they would put, like, tie-in songs with movies and stuff like that. You know, like Will Smith, Wild Wild West.
Yeah, of course.
Like, since it sort of became so commercialized around that time, it's sort of going back the opposite way now, and there's so much independent stuff going on. And, like, even all the big artists, they release their own albums. Like, very few of them do it through, like, major labels anymore. Maybe they might distribute a vinyl edition or a CD edition if they put one out, but it seems like most of it's released independently. So, yeah, I got to appreciate that as well. And yeah, no, this album, I also got to applaud its use of sampling the Temptations. That's a great sample. So there's a lot of, like, fun, like, sort of little production flares throughout it that sort of, I guess, like, juxtaposed to the sparse sound, sort of really pop, you know? So it's a good laid back, easy listen. Even like you were saying, it's what, 30 minutes.
Yeah,
it's
36 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, you put it in a rotation when you're just sort of listening to music laid back, and it fits in perfectly. You know, it's a good listen, definitely.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend it to anyone who has an ear for contemporary popular music in general. Like this is still sounds relatively fresh, or at least what was very liked and still has residue in the current climate of popular electronic based music. And as well as Little Ugly Mane, shout out some other the more interesting of these hip hop acts since the mid 2010s to now, which have really rejuvenated and really imbued a lot of creativity within the genre. People like Mac Homie, Billy Wood / Kenny Siegel, Injury Reserve, and a pick that I'm going to talk about what my third pick will be. And so that's been staples. This is Big Fish Theory. I'm hoping that I will enjoy the Dark Times album, and based upon the reception that it's receiving, I very much I like to think that I will. It's the best rated one on the site since Big Fish Fury Dark Times is, and yeah, so that ought to be exciting. And in that being said, I think we'll be moving on to an earlier instance of the genre, won't we?
Yeah, I'll recommend this next one to anyone who has an ear for ancient sounding hip hop slash the aesthetics of the sort of early era, right?
Well, it is that, but it's also at the time it's actually a big something representative of something of a transitional moment.
Oh, definitely 1988, and like I was just sort of joking about, its superficial sort of ancient sound in comparison. It's actually very subtle in its sort of inventiveness and electronic like intricacies and stuff like that, and very cutting edge in a way that is kind of retroactively still cutting edge, I feel. But yeah, that's all layered under. You just gotta love the sort of goofy era of hip hop. Though, like you said, this is right on the transitional moment, so it has a bit of the fun and the party, you know, mixed in with like the very beginning of like battle rap, I guess. Oh no, but I get battle rap was probably happening at that time. But I just love how half the verses on this album are just about how every MC is a sucker MC. It's so fun. I don't know. It's just such a fun album, and it's I suppose the opposite of the previous album. Rather than a laid back listen or even just sort of atmosphere at a party, this is like an album you put on at a party when you want people to dance.
Very upbeat, yeah.
Yeah, it's very upbeat and
conjures a lot of movement. Yeah.
Yeah, very like bass heavy as well, which I think was pretty far ahead of its time in that regard. You know, the sort of booming low end sort of thing. Though I'm not a scholar of these things, and I often find it sort of funny I just saw sometimes, and I swear I even saw a Family Guy joke about it once. There's this like sort of like white anthropology when it comes to like the scholarly study of hip hop, I feel.
Yeah.
Whereas this album just sort of, I don't know, as far as like culturally it means nothing to me. It's just all culturally, where it fits into the music culture, it means actually a lot. But as far as just a form of expression, it's just so fun and inventive, and is kind of just more about the music than any sort of overarching message or political. Like, it's definitely not political. And just it's got really creative like DJ turntable work for the time as well. This sort of sounds like it could be from the mid-90s. It's interesting. I didn't think there were that many DJs that would cut that hard in like the 80s, to be honest. And I don't know, you look at the cover as well. Like I said, it's so much fun, but I think it's around the time these guys, they want like this sort of music that I suppose was considered like novelty music. And like you said, it's on the precipice of a sort of new movement in hip-hop where they're sitting in a studio, right? I think they wanted this sort of to be taken seriously as studio construction music, you know? Like, the thing that I guess first caught me about the album was just because it's mentioned so many times by other hip-hop artists and stuff. But then when I first listened to it, I just loved its like use of sampling. It's like right on the the heights of like that sort of really taking over. Like, you know, it's probably around the same time as the first De La Soul album, and I guess the year before the Bomb Squad, the Public Enemy, start doing all the heavy samples, because their first album was just all like drum machine. And like it's the most out there, and as far, like, even though things like the Bomb Squad are all bombastic and chaotic, and the Prince Paul productions all sort of like eccentric and pristine and sort of flowery, like the aesthetic suggests, right? Whereas this one is like, it reminds me of just when, like, it's sort of in the like sort of Dada-esque tradition of like this sort of similar to sound collage music. It's sort of trying to cut up all little bits of pre-existing music, especially like a lot of like guitar staccatos from old like funk music and stuff, and it's just so addictive the way it'll weave all those things together. It really is like sort of montage music acting as party music. And it's just so, if you look past the of its era sheen, it's actually like ridiculously well constructed as a piece of sample collage. Like, I'm surprised they did it with just rudimentary equipment. I'm sure the studio would have helped. There are a few moments where you can hear the age of how it's being constructed, like the way the horns and the bass on the part of like Jungle Boogie maybe is a bit scratchy, but then you hear like a song like what's the name of it? One of the ones in the middle, I can't exactly recall, but it's just got constant sample of like a soul track, and then this like person screaming. It's like, where the hell did this come from in 1988? And then one of the guys rapping is a bit in the sort of like Curtis Blow flow school of flow, but the other guy, it's a bit more slick. I guess a bit pinched from like Rakim. But yeah, then the other guy, he must have been so stoned while he's putting all the bars together. It's I think it's the guy called E, because one's PMD and one's E, and he just has this sort of lazy drawl to his delivery. It's almost like a mumble, and in a weird way, that sort of ad lib. It's more done in ad lib these days than verses. But that sort of like stone drawly delivery eventually came back into fashion.
Very, very true. Yeah. Wow.
So I find it interesting how that works as well. It's just it's a weird moment in like electronic music, but then mixed with like party emceeing and battle rap. Everyone's a sucker MC. To me, it's just never ending fun. What do you reckon?
Oh no, this is really, really great, and yeah, anyone who likes this world of production, it's just a joy to listen to. And it comes out the same year as another seminal hip hop release, a Critical Beatdown by Ultramagnetic MCs. Just really exciting moment to have been into this genre at the time. I mean, that would have been a whole world of excitement. I can't even begin to imagine. And it's amazing how, if you were a fan of it in 1988, how you would have felt about the genre in 1998. That's fascinating to me, whether they would have felt it had gone too far from what they enjoyed about it, or whether they were excited by some of the major work coming out in the later 90s. Interesting to think about.
They probably liked Common, but didn't like Will Smith.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think many folks do at this point.
Yeah.
I got really great stuff, and I've very, very thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I think there's a lot of room to be. I mean, this is the era where you could just sample away and not have to worry about too many fees, right?
Yeah, pre-Biz Marquee.
Yeah, damn. Oh well, like, I mean,
it's weird. I didn't realize how popular, or like in a weird way, influential Biz Marquee was at the time as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird to think about now. But I guess he had a song called like Pee Wee Herman, and even this album, one of the tracks on it is called the Steve Martin.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't know if they're ripping on Biz Markie, but it's their own version, and it's a dance, and it's an awesome song. But yeah, it's weird that after that Biz Markie thing where they started prosecuting, because I think it was like the estate of, can't remember who, but yeah, someone sued Biz Markie, and then that was when the sampling got shut down.
Alright.
At least, like collage sampling did.
Mm-hmm.
You had to pay for all your samples, and so you only ended up, being able to pay for one or two songs on, like, samples on each song. And so, in a weird way, you end up getting this, like, less creative sort of form of it. Like P. Diddy doing Godzilla,
Right.
with Kashmir. It's like, that's when you just get Tupac with the Joe Cocker song. Or whatever.
Yeah.
You just end up getting like samples that are literally now just ripping off songs, rather than montaging old sounds into new songs. It's so strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, this is a big formative moment for hip hop, and it still seems to be in as we were saying just earlier, a rather strong and vitally interesting place. And if I may move on to my next pick with this attempt at a transition.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about this group known as Audrey. I believe they're from Canada. It says they're currently in Lethbridge, AB, which I assume is Alberta, Canada. They have 43 albums since 2022, and here we have this release from 2023. The only one I've spent a significant amount of time with, frankly, and it is called Undisclosed Advertising and End Credits.
That's a lot of albums.
Yeah, man. And it's a very fascinating thing here. This is Audrey on the cover art here. What we have is, do you remember in the 1990s, whether you were born around that time or after the matter, the genres of you could say this about like kind of the kind of existential wailing of Nirvana / Cobain in the grunge Seattle world, but also especially in the world of slowcore with groups like the Red House Painters, obviously, or in the post-rock world with groups like Sigur Rós from Iceland, probably most famously, but also Slint in that kind of that math rock environment there.
Did you ever hear that other like really well-rated slowcore band called Duster?
Little bits of them.
These guys must have been fans of Duster.
I think Duster are pretty liked now. I'm sure they were. They listened to Duster via the internet at least. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know how old these people are in Audrey, but I think those genres then were kind of. They were yearning for a time when rock was relevant, and there was this very depressive end of history pathology about a lot of that music. And it was imbued in a modernist fashion within the music itself, but it was also postmodern in that it was seemingly like standing outside at the end of time. That's the vibe you get from some of that music. That you can kind of put it in that contemporary space and feel like that's what they were thinking. Now it kind of, we can see it as conforming now to this kind of popularity of alt rock after the saturation of electronics in popular music in the 80s, and in between the more 21st century excitement. That kind of return to the real, sort of stripping down the edgy 90s. We can see it as a product of that, but also as a sort of, I think it's easy to forget, especially because some of us weren't necessarily around much then, that it did seem like there was a wall up against history and time, and that you had this this real flatlining of culture and ambition, because it was just going to be suburban lawns and picket fences forever, until some stuff happens in the early 2000s maybe, and then history seems to get a bit unpredictable again, or predictable depending on your perspective, I guess, really. But now 2023 / we're in 4 now, but this is from 2023. We're even more like with the abject anxiety about climate change, with the prospect of rental servitude / wage slavery. We're in a very pessimistic time as a society and culture globally. Not just in the English-speaking world, seemingly all over every nation, every corner of this earth. And this is like the last moaning gasp of that sort of that genre, like yearning, that kind of, God, it almost makes the Red House Painters world seem quaint by comparison. I mean, that still holds relevance as like a particular songwriter's kind of stories, but the like this Audrey feels like the death knell of the genre in a very kind of beautifully swan song mode. And I think now of like the sort of rock inspired groups trying to make it right now and doing their thing, and you have more contemporary in the Australian context Triple M types who wish they could be like Wolfmother or some such, and then just they're doing like bad pub gigs or whatever. Then there's the more alt/punk/ post-punk, as in both post-punk as in after-punk, sort of ethos, which, you know, gigging in the inner city and stuff like that, which is what it is, but that is sort of yearning for that 90s end of history moment. And why not? It does still feel like this sort of bleak moment where there's nothing to look forward to in the years and decades to come. And Audrey have kind of, I feel like, done the most creatively relevant thing, which was to infuse those walls of post-rock unpredictability and the hypnotic repetitions of slowcore and sadcore. I think that this is one of the very best examples of both genres I've ever heard, and I was very, very convinced of the relevance of these sounds as a sort of almost like this is, it's like something saying goodbye and we're going to go into a new era now. I felt the same way about, make a film comparison just for a moment, recent works by Wim Wenders. Perfect Days feels like the send-off to, it's like we're going a goodbye to that kind of perfect symmetrical, quasi-idyllic but not necessarily really views of mundane life, and we're kind of seeing it as a bit of an economic trap perhaps. Maybe we're going to go move forward in cinematographic philosophies in this art house / film festival world. And then when Glazer in the Zone of Interest utilised that sort of sort of Appalachia aesthetic / Wes Anderson-y symmetrical, satiating visual composition to depict an idyllic home next to the infamous place known as Auschwitz in 1944/5 or so. And all of a sudden,
Was that a club?
Of sorts, I guess, the implications of this aesthetic kind of are brought to the forefront, wherein it's such an easy way to, the celebration of aesthetic can be a very easy mask for some very sinister undertones, and we realize that there was a modernism that very much applied to some of the more evil, and certainly considered evil, moments in societies, cultures, in our species' quite recent history, and one which could be applied to a state that's very relevant in the news, and which is to the subject matter of Zone of Interest, which Glazer himself mentioned at the Academy Awards quite bravely, I think, but we don't want to get too much into that.
Who mentioned that?
The director of the film, Glazer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Made comparisons to events going on right now in a state that was enabled by acts depicted in the Zone of Interest.
Sure.
Yes, unfortunately. But, so, if those two
all
films...
enabled by the guy on the cover.
That's very true. And so I guess that's where Audrey, and so he brings back to Audrey's genius relevance then, is like, what's the end of history if not this man? Like, what is this? This is a metaphor for that world. That's definitely... That particular generation's world,
I didn't put two and two together, but that is a definitely interesting observation of maybe what the guy was going for with the album. Yeah, damn.
I consider, like those two films by Wenders and Glazer kind of sort of expose that aesthetic as sort of potentially beautiful, but sort of masking something which needs to be explored further. It's not like there is something of a end of history / insistent modernism about those things, which is sort of potentially masking something, whether it's sort of wage servitude in Wim Wenders' Perfect Days, or potentially hierarchical, genocidal, subconscious pathology of Glazer's The Zone of Interest. And we also have Audrey sort of in with undisclosed advertising and end credits. In painfully crying into this world, the final opus of music played with instruments used in rock groups, let's say, and just so I don't potentially keep chewing on my foot here, I'll let you go.
No, it's interesting that this album would evoke such like sort of intimate analysis of the historical propulsion of like music culture, especially like the end times of rock music. Definitely, it feels like that was probably a conscious choice with the sort of overarching landscape of the album as well. What could I say about it? You're right. Hypnotic, chiming, chugging, Joe Biden, and ketamine or cocaine on the album cover. That's certainly what you get with something like this, and definitely the hypnosis aspect, because it's quite a long listen. So it's the sort of thing you just sort of...
Yeah, like 72 minutes, just for clarification.
Yeah, 72 minutes. So, like the best post-rock, it you need to engage with it in a sort of intimate way. It's not the sort of... It's not casual listening music. It's in the tradition of, like, old sort of audio experiments, like Music Concrete sort of stuff, and things like that. Like, I suppose, just done with rock instruments. And so it's sort of a prerequisite to it is a sort of a willingness to sort of jump into the journey or whatnot.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not like, say, the your last choice being only, say, like 30 minutes.
Oh, exactly, yeah. Very different than that.
It's a very different sort of world. And one thing I do kind of really enjoy as well is the way that after long instrumental passages in this album, there'll be sort of like a very far away sort of faint sounding, inaudible, I guess in the sort of school of shoegaze vocals, but like, sort of singing that just, it's so... Like, it may as well not be words. It's sort of... It just, it's like a muted phone conversation or something.
Yeah.
It just... It fits into the music so perfectly. As opposed to... Most slowcore and post-rock is instrumental. But, I do enjoy that as an effect, especially on a more, post-rock leaning experimental one, as opposed to, say, the Red House Painters or something, which is, I guess, more in the folk tradition.
That's true.
With the same long extended hypnotic passages on longer songs. But, this one's it's the sort of music where there is a real, if you take that thesis seriously of what they were trying to do in the late 90s and then sort of very early 2000s before it then became, like you mentioned before, a sort of new take on getting rid of the edgy 90s.
Yeah.
That sort of late 90s moment where they wanted to bring about, a new sort of approach rather than rock songwriting. I listen to this and I feel like there's still more you can do with that thesis, Yeah, so somehow the end of rock music is actually the best rock music.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
yeah. There is something to be potentially said for that. It was true in the post-punk era, and it might be true now potentially. Especially the more classics that are unearthed. And this is not the most popular or well-rated album. It seems to be Audrey's most famous. Oh, with 3.24, that's not so bad, I suppose.
Yeah.
But, I'm very, very, very fond of this one. I think it's one of the more exciting and compelling.
Definitely a new classic,
2023, or the 2020s in general. if there's, and frankly, if people say, oh, well, what about this, hey, send them my way. I want to hear them. It's not a competition for me. I enjoy it all if I can. I'd like to. And now, I suppose it's time to go back in time quite a bit. Right?
Yeah. However many million years BC. I always forget. 50?
65 million years?
65, that's how many years. Yeah, we're going to go right back to the original hip-hop album. This is sort of the album that started it all in the world of hip-hop. No, I'm talking about T-Rex by T-Rex. I think it's 1970?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the first T-Rex album that wasn't a Tyrannosaurus Rex release. I believe there's 3
Yeah.
of those, right?
3 or 4 Tyrannosaurus Rex. And then, this is the album before
4, you're right. Yeah.
the sort of like all-encompassing album that sort of looms over their entire career.
Electric Warrior.
Yeah. And so this album, like, I guess it's often considered like a sort of transitional album between Tyrannosaurus Rex and then what became T-Rex, Electric Warrior, The Slide, and like later albums and stuff. Though they went in strange directions, like having dragons on the album cover and stuff. But who doesn't like that? The early album covers actually are pretty awesome, like psychedelic illustrations and stuff.
I like a lot of this was really interesting. I need to. I've heard those all before, but I need to listen to them more. So
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's sort of, it's like hippie-ish bongo and acoustic guitar music that sounds like it's made by a naive, like impish, like Anglo-Saxon in pre 1066 England.
Pre-Norman invasion.
Yeah, pre-Norman invasion. But then on this album, it definitely is transitional in its sound, because I think he fired the bongo player, who's what's his name again? He's named after one of the characters from Lord of the Rings. Which one's the Took?
Oh, Peregrine?
Yeah, he's named like Sam Peregrine Took.
Okay.
And so this is his last appearance before I guess Mark Bolden just sort of replaced him with a more traditional band. So yeah, this album will have it's a strange like I was saying before, hippie-ish, like impish, folk, sort of like spaced out sound and songwriting with bongos. But then it's also got the sound of Mark Bolan, like sort of embracing the electric guitar for sort of the first time, I think, and sort of learning the ins and outs. And so you sort of hear a guy who became a very like inventive electric guitar player later, not a traditional one in any sense. I think he often gets ripped for being either too basic or too eccentric, but that's sort of the cream of his style, is because he came at it from a strange angle, a very non-traditional angle. So this album is like listening to that person learn how to sort of implement the electric guitar into his previous band's sound.
Yeah.
And it's just filled with weird, like mystical sort of songs throughout the whole album. I think one of them even bands it might have been Ride a White Swan, which was a single around this time. Though, no, I think it's like the second track on the album. Someone like Susie and the Banshees covered it. So, like, T-Rex are weirdly influential in that whole movement. I guess, like I was saying earlier, they're all kids when at the end of the psychedelic pop and then glam era. They're sort of becoming adolescents and stuff. David Bowie and Mott the Hoople and T-Rex and stuff like that is sort of taking over before the Fox on the Run band did. What are they called again?
Sweet.
Yeah, Sweet. Or like Slade or something. These sort of more forgotten, less critically, sort of led glam bands. But yeah, this album is strange because it's more in that psyched out folk world rather than the glam world, but it's sort of just on the precipice. And so it has this weird, maybe like retrospectively ahead of its time sound. And I didn't realize this until I was re-listening to the last album I picked. And you can hear sort of these bands from the 2000s, that era you were talking about, getting rid of the 90s edginess, who were like, and I guess it's tied into even the like hypnagogic pop movement and stuff like that. They were going back to older 50s, 60s, 70s sounds and reinterpreting them with a sort of contemporaneous modernism to the early 20th, first century.
Yeah.
And this album, like, somehow feels like it's ahead of that curve, still doing it within the 60s hippie paradigm, you know? And that this slow incorporation of, you know, 50s R&B and old rock and roll sort of stuff is just sort of the way it blends with the hippie paradigm is sort of ahead of its eventual sort of reconnecting later on. And I love one thing that's often criticized about T-Rex is like the nonsense lyrics and stuff. And I guess I could see how that would piss off someone who needs these very like literal lyrics. Not necessarily literate, but like literal. It has to follow a sort of literalism. Whereas his lyrics are like, sort of I was saying with someone like Sean Ryder from the Happy Mondays on a previous episode, it's just these sort of like zoned out, spaced out musings that you're not meant to take them literally. They're meant to sort of paint weird imagery in your head, you know? Like, I don't know, there's some nonsense line on this album that's just like, there's these invaders from the New World with their zebra pterodactyls. You're like, fuck yeah. Is that not awesome? It doesn't make sense. But it's, I think he was sort of, this is where like this album has the last carryover of that hippie paradigm before, I guess, Electric Warrior. There's this sort of weird, vaguely like mystical aspect to this imagery. It's sort of like from that naive, you know, sort of Wind in the Willows, Syd Barrett sort of school of English.
Yeah. Sort of Edwardian eccentric.
Yeah. Sort of, tied into a sort of mystic ruralism or something. And so, this album is just, I'm not sure if it's that big amongst T-Rex fans. Like, I know the song Ride a White Swan is considered like their first big hit or whatever. But this is one of their albums I enjoy the most, to be honest. I don't know why. Maybe because it's just such a strange blend of T-Rex. It's like a thermometer to measure the temperature of other T-Rex albums by.
Lovely.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, this is really good. Look, I think everything, like T-Rex from like 68, Tyrannosaurus Rex 68 to like 73. What a great run.
Yeah, it's a good run.
Beautiful work, and I think it's all superlative pretty much. And this is another really good one. It's interesting how it's a little bit like Fleetwood Mac in the Then Play On era, where it's less bluesy and more, I guess more folky, and the guitar is more akin to, rather than Peter Green, I guess you could say, I know it's quite exactly alike, but that Syd Barrett world of doing odd things.
Sure.
But no, it's a fantastic and interesting thing. It's remarkable how they're seemingly two sides of the coin, the hippie flower child moment and the glam rock wannabe superstar era. But Bolan not only moved from one into the other, he kind of formulated the latter in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's really fascinating.
He was more famous as the glam guy than he ever was as the hippie.
Yeah, and so he creates something which, David Bowie kind of copies that a little bit. He was also a wannabe flower child in a way. Or wannabe Syd Barrett, I guess, by his own admission.
Sure, yeah. Definitely Syd Barrett.
And then obviously Mott the Hoople, Roxy Music spring up. Some of the more, God almighty, like it's a movement where Brian Eno kind of made his chops. Like this, the glam rock thing is, probably, yeah. Well, if it's not equally important to psychedelic rock, it's because there's the huge American component to psychedelic rock as well. But if we're just talking about a British scene, it's equally important to the British psych moment, I think. But psych rock globally, like glam rock's mostly just a UK phenomenon. So comparing it to psych rock on the whole seems a bit much. But I think just relegated within that domestic context, the glam rock was equally, Roxy Music and David Bowie, like that's that can go up against the Beatles and the Stones for sure.
Definitely for people who were like kids at the time as well. Yeah.
I mean, even like just listening back to it, like I think like that's a far more interesting moment potential, at least within the UK context.
Certainly.
I know in America you can bring up, you know, the likes of 13th Floor or Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, Zappa. Like there's a lot of United States of America, Red Crayola, Silver Apples. There was a lot of psych that in the States that makes it like one of the most interesting global moments in the history of recorded music. Although just within the UK context at least, you know how like they always talk about the 60s being the great UK moment. Glam's just as good in my opinion, and possibly even cooler as that 80s post-punk world.
Sure.
All the pop electro, like as in post-punk as in, and you know, post as an after punk, you know, when you led to, you know, this weird spectrum from Nevermind the Bollocks to Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. Like that's cool as, right?
Yeah.
And one of the five most important figures in here, you know, they said, it's all downstream of Sid Barrett and Kevin Ayers. Well, there's a third name they mean to mention there. It's Mark Bolan.
Yeah, that's true, certainly. Forgetting the bowls.
Because that's even a priori to David Bowie in a sense. Because if Barrett / Ayers influences the Space Oddity Bowie, and if apparently, so I've heard, Elton John influenced the Hunky Dory Bowie. Then Mark Bolan influenced Ziggy.
Certainly. Like the other sort of intrinsic
Nick Ronson,
connection between the two is also Visconti.
Oh yes,
the producer.
I ought to remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of.
He produced
weird.
Bowie first, and then was on Electric Warrior, and then was on.
Oh, he was on the first T-Rex album.
Oh, okay, that. I remember.
Yeah. And then I guess he produced Space Oddity.
And I believe Man Who Sold the World as well.
Okay.
I don't think he produced for Bowie again until I think Station to Station or Young Americans.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Definitely by Berlin, but goes up to Scary Monsters, but yeah, I mean I can look this up really.
That's right, because he got Nile Rodgers after that.
Yeah. There's an interesting story that's worth sharing here. I have a CC video on Scary Monsters. It's probably in there as well, but Nile Rodgers was very excited to work with David Bowie. He's like, oh wow, Scary Monsters Part 2 is going to be a big artistic statement. And David Bowie said, right, we're going to make commercial pop music.
I got to pay back the record label.
And not only was it just commercial pop music, but it was far less sophisticated than the commercial pop music that Nile Rodgers actually worked on.
Yeah.
Nile Rodgers was quite a genius in his own way. And I think Bowie underutilized him, frankly. I'm a bit disappointed by that.
Yeah.
Album. It's not horrible. Let's Dance is not a bad album by any means.
Because Nile Rodgers was making dance music more than pop music.
Good point.
But it was very high charting dance music because it was that good and sort of ahead of cutting edge, you know.
Dancing.
And
yeah. I think you're dancing.
Oh, that song's great, yeah.
Dancing.
All those chick songs they're great songs.
I never liked Good Times and Freak that much.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, like,
Good Times is better.
Everybody danced, like, oh my god.
Yeah, that's
and
a
the Joey,
song.
who's it? Who's this? That
Oh,
remix?
Joey Negro.
Is it Joey Negro?
I think
the
so.
Vibes remix.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I gotta look this up. I just gotta know.
But yeah, I'm sure like if David Bowie had dance beats and like his sheeny sort of rhythmic guitar on Scary Monsters 2, that would have been awesome.
Oh man.
But yeah, no, Let's Dance isn't really dancey. Did people dance to that song?
I don't know. People danced to lots of comedy crap in the 80s.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think it is Joey Negro. I was wondering if it was it would have been too. It wouldn't be this, but who's that other guy? I thought we were like Todd Terje, but no, it's not him.
It was the guy who did When the Deserts Miss the Rain remix.
Oh, who's that?
Who knows?
I fucking love that song.
I love it. Yeah, they turned a sophisticated cafe band into a
Everything But the
Euro
Girl.
disco song.
Everything But the Girl's like a Mr. Show band. Like
Probably,
like
yeah.
the name of one. Like
I don't even know any.
hilarious name.
Yeah. That's the only song of theirs I really know. But yeah, they're I guess like a sophisti band before that.
Oh God Almighty, T-Rex.
Yeah, what's the next one?
Oh, I guess I'm moving on to one of the most not only interesting hip hop albums of the 2020s/2020 itself, but of any genre. This is Cities of Eve with God. It's got an interesting. I forget the title of it. This is very embarrassing. Gum.
Yeah, Wrigley Core.
One of the most. This is like noise hip hop. I mean, apparently he was inspired by post-punk acts, and I mean, I just think it's phenomenally exciting, invigorating. I listen to it again and I get memories of like, oh yeah, this, and it's like becomes like a big. It's a great example of you grow to adore these things like a Listen 5, and you're just like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, I love all these moments, and yeah, comparing it to some of these other major 2020 releases that are highly rated on this website, I mean, I think it destroys a lot of them. That Run the Jewels albums is good, but like this is just shamelessly original, genuinely seemingly original. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe you have precedents in stuff like electronic music like Burial or other industrial hip hop like Dalek, and Little Ugly Mane exists as well, to be fair. But God, it's such a. Sometimes I feel like even in the 90s there weren't enough albums like this. Like this is fucking cool as, and I don't know, like obviously it's not. I just said it was noise hip hop, which is to say like yeah, it's not necessarily for everyone, like more casual listeners of both hip hop and electronic music, or casual listeners, people who enjoy the more mainstream stylings of those two things. This might be a bit alienating, and if you're saying
it's more like Audrey.
That's the point.
if you like straightforward rock and roll, you're not gonna like Audrey.
No,
if you like straightforward hip hop, you wouldn't like this. But if you're into the more eccentric sides of these things, oof. Yeah, please.
Like tripping to this is like tripping to some strange industrial album.
Yeah,
it's like an odd experience. I don't know if it'd be quite as intense as the time. I visited the nursery, and that's
Psychic TV, a genius.
Oh Jesus Christ! And but okay, this album's listed as 22 for 2020, and I think it's apt that it's in this top 40 here. But I mean, I think it's like the best thing here. Like there's some other good stuff here, and I just want to quickly maybe give a few things shout outs. I've expressed some praise for that How I'm Feeling Now by Charlie CX before, but like it's not calm. And Alfredo by Freddie Gibbs and the Alchemist, that's really good, but it's not calm. I mentioned the Run the Jewels release. Brass by More Marvin Billy Woods, it's very good, it's not calm. And neither is that EV's Tumor album, that's pretty good. Heaven to a Tortured Mind, it's not calm. Meaningful Stone, Call for My Dream, it's good, it's not calm. Oh, here's another album. It's worth talking about his other work, because some of that's pretty good too, but I haven't listened to it as much as Gum, because one of his other work is actually listed here. He's been quite prolific. Accompanied by Blazing Solo is another one of his, yeah. Oh, there's that Turkish hip hop album, Andy Kahraman, that's good stuff. That's fun stuff. And R.I.P. Ferreira. If I listen to that one a bit more, that might wind up on the show one day. Purple Moonlight Pages. Yeah, it's very interesting stuff, indeed. And yeah, that's 2020 of some stuff I'm familiar with. Cities of Eve was born 1989, Memphis, Tennessee, United States. He's been releasing albums since 2011, 11 of them actually, and I believe where he really began to be considered an interesting, well-rated artist according to this site was in 2020 itself. He releases 2011, 2014, 15, 18, and then 4 in 2020. It's not much to do in the lockdown, I suppose. Immortal Flame, Score, Gum. Score might be like kind of, I'm not sure what, I think this is like it doesn't have many reviews, so I'm not, oh no, it's a digital file. I mean, this one doesn't seem to be listened to as much. I haven't heard this one. I might have listened to Immortal Flame, definitely listened to, obviously, Gum, and accompanied by a Blazing Solo, that's quite interesting. And I haven't heard this 2021, The Crashing Sound of How It Goes, but 2022, Man Plays the Horn, has the potential to be similarly interesting to Gum. Like, it's the one that the sound seems to be closest to, and that seems pretty fucking killer. And also from 22, working title for the album, Secret Waters, and I've listened to a bit of that. Seemed pretty cool, more minimal, but like come to my memory. But I might need to spend more time with it. Point is, like, one of those phenomenally interesting artists around right now, even if he had just come, but now we've got some hints of other work. But like a few other acts, like Death's Dynamic Sound, like Audrey, who have like 1 million albums. I didn't specify, by the way, that Audrey have how many albums since 2022? 43. Sometimes they count like weird releases, and I'm not sure if they count on this website, but whatever. That's someone else's problem to figure this out. CDs of Viv 2020s. Actually, this might be mild fun because I'm curious as to where it would land in the 2020s, if it lands in the 2020s in general. Just gonna look at that quickly. Actually, give your thoughts on the album while I'm doing that.
Yeah, please. Yeah, this is a new classic. This might be like my favorite album of the 2020s. It's yeah, like there's too much to say really, because it's an hour and a half long epic, and it's interesting you said he was inspired by post punk artists because like
on Wikipedia at some point. Yeah.
This felt very like post rock as well.
Yeah.
Like I sort of compared to your previous choice, Audrey. And it's just filled with these sort of elongated noise passages, and then the style of rapping on it isn't even rapping. It's just really a combination of spoken word and the ad-libbing sort of style I was talking about before, the sort of laid-back E from EPMD, but without verses, just sort of piping in with peculiar and sort of opposite thoughts that you realize somehow through the display of how he utilizes them will become adjacent in a strange way. And then the music follows a similar sort of ethos where it'll sort of mash up all these sort of soul samples, piano breaks, sort of all the classic tropes of like the sort of, I guess, like, Jay Dilla sort of donut style of sampledelia, the sort of that 21st century take on, what EPMD and things like that were starting earlier.
Yeah.
And it also falls into like the glitch hop world as well, with lots of like, if boom bap is an onomatopoeia, then glitch hop should be called because it's a fun way to bridge samples as well, when perhaps it wouldn't be as fluid in just a loop. You chuck in that glitch and it's sort of, it's almost like a strange time signature or something. So like this album's got that, and it mixes it just all, it's such a rich culmination of disparate styles, and done in woven in a sort of beautiful tapestry. Like I was just sort of enamored the whole time listening to it, and it's definitely, like I said, one of the best albums, if not easily the best album I've heard recently. And there's just something about, you can tell, it's amazing this guy made 4 albums in a year, because like I've noticed myself when you're making these sort of heavily sampled collage sort of things, you'll eventually, because they're sort of from such disparate sources, you'll get a lot of like residual resonance, sort of like bleed over, and you can cover that up or mask it out in sort of different ways, especially if you've got better software than say what I'm using. You can do it in a really intricate way, which is interesting. But I just find it, this guy has an interesting way of constructing this sort of music, because of the way he'll take that resonance bleed through and incorporate it into whatever will happen next, It's sort of, it feels like it's fulfilling the potentials of like digital production, especially in the it's very contemporary, like thematically as well. But that also ties into the ethos of the music. It reminds me of another glitch hop artist, one you mentioned earlier, Injury Reserve.
Oh, really?
They have a song on their last album, which is got all these weird references to like 5G software, like towers going up and stuff. And this album has that same sort of stream of consciousness, like unhinged pathology, spurting lyrically, and even that comes up in this, and it'll mix in with the sound as well. The same way that Injury Reserve did it. It's interesting. That album's probably the year after this as well.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of idea that's floating in the creative ether, especially in the sort of industrial glitch hop, experimental hip hop world, and it makes sense as well. It's around 2020 because it incorporates so much of like parasocial, like angst-driven, paranoid internet culture.
Oh yeah.
Especially from around the COVID lockdown eras, you know, and so maybe like that Sun Kill Moon album, Lunch in the Park. It encapsulates that era in such an intimate way that you just can't help but sort of understand the collective panic, anxiety, and like trauma from such events.
Yeah, this album was released 22nd May 2020, so it's like right in the when people were reaching a breaking point, I think.
Yeah, wow. So it's music that can, like, maybe similar to the nuclear wave moment. It's coming from a real place, you know.
That's a great point. Yeah.
A real sort of zeitgeist type, collective unconscious, you know, subconscious sort of place.
Yeah.
And for an album like this, which is fairly, it's not like flashy, to still be that, you know, it's not like the sort of more bombastic end of experimental new hip hop.
Not necessarily.
It's more in the vein of like even ambient music. Like there are ambient sort of drone passages as well. So it's interesting you mentioned post-punk because I guess it does have that sort of DIY ethos to it as well.
Some kind of industrial corridor, like
industrial tape music, sample,
concrete
delia
flat sort of sound.
Definitely,
Estates / projects, and it's a long listen at 84 minutes, but longer than the Audrey release actually. Even.
Yeah, but like the Audrey release, if you commit to it, it's worth it. Like if you want to have a journey album or whatever, it'll definitely take you somewhere, you know.
Yeah, the reason I picked this plus the previous two releases is because I wanted to. All three of these I've discussed in Cosmic Criticism before, but I really want to emphasize Insurmountable Modern Classics. Those videos were probably about a year ago now, and they've had an immense, very welcome staying power, and I want to keep championing them more or less.
Yeah, no, that's definitely. Especially if it's something like this.
And now I think, unless you've got anything else to share.
Nah.
So we'll be going back to, this is one's from quite a while ago now.
Yeah, I suppose 2 years after T-Rex. This one is Curtis Mayfield. It's an interesting album. It was inspired a very famous television miniseries, which shares the name of the first track, The Get Down, produced by Baz Luhrmann from 2016. This is Roots. And this is sort of, I'm sure people are more familiar with the Curtis album, the album from the year before, sort of one of the starts of the initial, I guess, blending of like psychedelic soul with funk and stuff like that. But this album, I guess, is sort of lives in the shadow of that one a little bit.
And maybe the soundtrack from the next year?
Yeah, Superfly, sure. But I think this album has, I don't know, it's just such a concise collection of amazing psychedelic soul songs. Like, I don't know if there's a collection that sort of hits you in the head so hard like this one does. With, it's sort of natural blend of dancey, funky tracks and then soul ballads and sort of similar to T-Rex, I suppose, hippie-ish era, anti-war sort of, anti-Vietnam and sort of like dystopian dictator state sort of philosophy. And I don't know, just when you hear the falsetto of Curtis Mayfield giving such revolutionary ideas out, you can't help but just sort of love it, And man, for some reason I just, within the last year, I've probably listened to this album 50 times. Yeah. It's just, for some reason it just keeps me coming back to it. It's just of all the albums from that sort of psychedelic soul era, I honestly think this is one of the best ones. I can't praise enough pretty much all the songwriting, the production, the instrumentation. Similar to, I suppose, Mark Bolan, I think a lot of people have ripped on Curtis Mayfield lyrics for having silly rhyming couplets and shit like that. But I think that guy is just, he's not one of these, once again, sort of literal songwriters. He's more of a musician who, when he puts words to songs, they sort of, I guess in the 60s they were tied to the civil rights movement, so they were a bit more they were political songs.
Yeah.
And a bit of that bleeds over into the 70s stuff, but I feel that just, rather than being, it's post-civil rights in as far as it's mixing it in with that mystical, drug-induced sort of even though I don't think he was that into drugs, Curtis Mayfield, but the sort of psychedelic hippie movement. And so it's a sort of, he's sort of within the realm of the world of There's a Riot Going On by Sly Stone and in the Black Panthers, that sort of militant post civil rights movement. There was just Curtis Mayfield who tried to sort of keep the ultimate sentiment of he incorporated the ultimate sentiment of the hippie era into that sort of civil rights politics, right? And it's so strange how he's the guy who tried to keep that alive throughout the 70s and even through the 80s and stuff like that. I remember once seeing a live video of one of the songs on this album, and he was he brought up Vietnam as fairly contemporaneous to the 80s, but he's man, we've got to have peace. And then everyone's just sort of almost smirking at the sentiment. And I found it so interesting that it was almost either sort of just thrown under the rug, the whole Vietnam era in the 80s, or whether it was just snarked at, in a sort of nervous laughter. It's interesting that the one guy who sort of, at least in the world of American music, wanted to keep that dream going, because I guess he saw it as a legitimate vision of the future, a mixture of Martin Luther King's dream and the sort of socialist hippie utopianism,
Yeah.
And this album, I'm not sure why it's called Roots. I suppose it's similar to that television miniseries. It's harkening back to the roots of black culture in America or something.
Yeah.
But there's a sort of universalism to it that must be rooted in that, but it sort of goes beyond that in a very humanist way. And maybe that's why I keep coming back to this album, because other than just being good music and songs, it's also that. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and where it sort of weaves into the history of humanist thought, and is a very real expression of said thought.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sort of astounded, really. What do you reckon?
Well, Curtis Mayfield, I was never as familiar with his albums. I've listened to the Superfly soundtrack, but
Yeah.
I mean, he's got 21 albums, 1970 onward, and I'm certainly not familiar with anything after the 1970s. I don't know if you've given that much of his overall oeuvre much of a listen.
No, not the 80s stuff, but I heard that like 90s album, the last one, The New Old Order.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting album. The production's a bit separated from its style, but it can work with the electronics and stuff.
Yeah, like, I mean, yeah, but in any case, really good album, this Roots thing. It's interesting how you note like a sort of spiritual inclination towards some of the soul and early funk of this period. And it's like what was happening with jazz around this time, when you have obviously Alice Coltrane, John and Alice, but even Cannibal Adderley has some unusual look for compared to his earlier work. Pan-African theme albums in the 70s at Pyramid, I think it's called, and then you have something of a far cry from him and Bill Evans doing Know What I Mean in the early 60s, seemingly. I mean, both are musically very interesting, of course. And it's, whichever. There's apples and oranges, I would suggest.
It's like John Coltrane doing My Favorite Things, and then John Coltrane going,
kind of cosmic music, or that last show at last performance at Newport, which is really interesting. Ferris Sanders is on that, and that's like a kettle. But
kettle.
There's old metal kettles.
The whistling.
Yeah, but
now that's resonance.
they're because and the I think it's kind of part of that post-bop mentality in general was to incorporate other genres like soul and
post-bop
and blues into to expand what the bebop sort of formula had kind of become, I guess, identifiable as this sort of unpredictable wild genre had become kind of categorized, and so they needed to sort of branch. They felt an impulse to branch out a bit, and the post-pop world is some of my favorite jazz. I guess you could partly characterize Miles' work in the late 60s leading up to the electronic era. The albums like Sorcerer, Miles in the Sky, Nefertiti, some of the very best albums that he or anyone else ever made. That's I guess you could classify that as post-pop potentially. Moving on from I don't know if you would call, I guess you can say he's moved on from modal jazz by that point. I mean, I think sometimes I'm not as specific with the terminology of some of these jazz genres / subgenres as maybe I ought to be, but I guess that it just relates back to the soul genre rather. There's and obviously there was, I guess there's some spiritual resonance or residue maybe rather in the kind of some of the Marvin Gaye. I guess what's going on is sort of this universalist plea, and I mean, I guess the whole, I mean, even the psychedelic soul, where that kind of commences partly was popularized just the Temptations, that psychedelic shack-hole. That's very, I guess, kind of obviously a far cry from the monogamy of, it's kind of a joke, but my girl, and then psychedelic soul, the shack is the kind of the more, a bit of more of a utopian sort of lens there, and I'm just really, okay, I guess the people consider around ESP, Miles is kind of transitioning from at 65 from modal jazz to the post pop. So I'm not too inaccurate there. That's quite fun to hear. Anyway, I also thought, because psychedelic soul is brought up, I wanted to briefly mention this little album here. You're not going to see it on the screen here because I just don't want to fuck too much with my formula. I don't know, I'm a hypocrite here. But yeah, Albino Gorilla, Detroit 1984 from 1970. Well, how strange you would call an album Detroit 1984 and 1970. There's this is Albino Gorillas on the cover there. There is a lot of covers on this album, and I think Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Psychedelic Shack is actually the last track. Going to a Go-Go.
Covers are a staple of the genre.
Yeah, and I think that might annoy some people, or contemporary listeners. But it's such a smooth, slick production, and it's so fine and fun that I just feel like it's worth mentioning here. I don't know if I would have enough to say about it other than it's pretty awesome. Check it out. for actual Mandala programs. So yeah, might as well bring it up here now.
Yeah,
Detroit, 1984. By Albino Gorilla from 1970. Shame it has 2.79 on here, guys. It's not good.
Yeah.
So it should be 3.9 something. Just because I was going to say 4 point, and not much is over 4. So I can't be too ridiculous about this.
Yeah, Roots isn't over 4. What's that? Like 3 something?
Oh, it's very high. It's 3.82.
Oh wow, that is pretty high. But his other albums are probably over 4, aren't they?
Well, yeah, like there's just to double. Yeah, Curtis of that one is 4.05 and Superfly is 4.08. And
whoa, that album is that good musically though. That album, Superfly invented the porn music, and both like 70s porn music and 70s car chase music, right.
And the other 2 albums that are very well rated is 75's There's No Place Like America, Today, 1975.
Yeah.
And also Back to the World from 73 is quite well rated.
Yeah, that one's classic. Definitely.
And there's some Curtis Mayfield for you all today. I guess we'll be moving on to something else now from the 1970s. Unless you want to share anything else about Curtis here?
No, this is the British Psychedelic Soul Act.
In an interesting way, maybe. Yeah, look, just I guess really just briefly here. It's not that I wanted to talk about Zeppelin actually so much as House of the Holy, which is my first and favourite of the Led Zeppelin albums. And I'm pretty traditionalist other than that. I think 4 is my second favourite.
Yeah, didn't last week you said one day I might bring up Zeppelin? Then lo and behold, a week later.
Yeah, I think I kind of intended that to happen anyway.
Nice.
And the first album I think is fantastic as well. It's my third favourite. So, but House of the Holy doesn't tend to be picked by people as the favourite. To me, even as a teenager, it always just seemed obvious that this was
except for Pitchfork magazine.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, good on them, I guess. Thanks, GQ.
Thanks, GQ.
But no, House of the Holy always seemed obvious to me as a teenager was the most interesting of the albums. And yeah, of course, 4, other than that 4, and then 1. And my 4 favourite's actually Present, so I'm a bit of a weirdo there too. It's fucking amazing, guys. Come on.
Yeah, it has its fans.
Oh yeah, it's true. They're out there.
And their fans are hardcore, I guess, like yourself.
The Houses of the Holy to me is not only like to me, like people talk about like what's the Zeppelin album you represent as one of the great works, LPs of that period. The House of the Holy is the one. You put that up with the likes of Fragile, the likes of Dark Side of the Moon. I'm more of an Animals guy, but let's just say Dark Side of the Moon for point of reference. You put it up with the likes of, if you're going to champion Who's Next or Quadrophenia, you're going to, Tarkus or Brain Salad Surgery. House of the Holy is this fascinating it's called the kind of quasi-prog Zeppelin album. And I think the way you can test how proggy it is imagine if Zeppelin were an established prog band somehow and then they put out this particular release. It would seem like all was fine until you got to the funk of the grunge and then...
Prog meets the White Album.
Interesting.
With its genre melding and strange creative choices.
Yeah. And grunge would seem weirdly funky, and Dancing Days maybe a bit straightforward, and you got a reggae track, I guess, on Jamaica. No Quarter is like, oh, here's the prog again, and then The Ocean's like the most straightforward hard rock track on there, really, at the end there. It's one of their best ones of that style, I would say. So it is an interesting example of, the group have finally convinced everyone that they're brilliant, at least commercially. I think critics had a problem with Zeppelin for at the time, but so Zeppelin on top of the world at this time, certainly materially, whatever. The Aleister Crowley kind of all the sigils worked out for Jimmy Page, and I guess Houses of the Holy is there. Like, I'm really fascinated by the albums after the smash hit where they're just like, all right, let's just go for it, and this is like the ultimate of those, and naturally the fans are like, no, this went too far in a few places. Look, I'm on board with G-Maker, I don't even care, and they nailed the funk and the grunge. Like, that's Bonham's funk drumming is superlative. And I think every song remains the same. We all love that. Rain Song, we all love that. Over the Hills and Far Away, we all love that. And wow, them doing that in under 5 minutes, like, they're good at the epics, but that's like as epic as anything they ever did.
Side A is pretty epic in that sense, definitely.
And the grunge I love. Dancing Days is really great, a bit straightforward for the rest of the album, but pretty awesome, I think. G-Maker, I said I was a fan. No Quarter is like my favourite thing they did along with Achilles' Last Stand. And that song, there's a song on Visual Graffiti called In the Light, which I really adore. And then, of course, and Battle of Evermore, that's perfect, of course. Just got there's this hulking thing there. And The Ocean I said was really great. I stand by that, of course. I guess it's not underrated really, but like I guess I feel as though like it is in the sense that it's not the one that's mentioned when there's the Token Zeppelin album brought up, where it's like it's like people might throw in from other groups. So it's like you see a set of Close to the Edge, Quadrophenia, Brain Salad Surgery, and it's got to be Houses of the Holy, not Four. Those ones I mentioned aren't even my favorite albums of those groups. Like, I'm more of a Fragile guy than Close to the Edge guy. I'm maybe the only one at this point. I don't know why. And I'm more Tarkus than Brain Salad Surgery. Of those 70s ones, yeah, Quadrophenia is the best from the Who, but I think Who Sell Out is the peak of that act, actually. My favourite, anyway. As I was a Zeppelin hard rock guy before I was a prog guy, and Houses of the Holy was my favourite, and then I guess as I became more of a prog fan, it made more sense why Houses of the Holy had always been my favourite, because I was just more inclined toward electronics and production rather than guitars. I was more of a keyboard and synth guy, as it turned out.
Yeah, well, that's definitely the strength of this album, is its production.
Yeah, good old John Paul Jones, the secret weapon of the band, as some have said. Jimmy was either a really good producer or he employed the right engineers, some say a bit of both, because there's always a different engineer on these albums.
Well, I was reading today as well, I didn't realise that this album was, like, John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page, I guess, bought their own home studios by this point. And so their job of demoing the album was to utilize their home studio so they could arrange like sort of songs themselves through their home studio and then bring it together as a band later in other studios. So it's interesting how they were like, I didn't realize that sort of DIY aspect to the creation of this album. It definitely shows in its like intricacy rather than like, I don't know, how bands had to quickly do rush jobs through studios, unless you were the Beatles.
Yeah.
Or Led Zeppelin, I guess, eventually.
Yeah, at this point, so.
By the time of something like 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah.
But, yeah, by this point they have even more tools to utilize.
Yeah, it's like they Wish You Were Here, in a way.
Sure.
Wish You Were Here is like total risk,
Yeah, definitely.
I thought this is risky, but I guess to the traditional audience, fan base, it's a bit risky.
Supposedly it wasn't received that great by the critics at the time.
No, but neither had before been.
Oh, okay. I thought
maybe it was one of those cases where by the time this came out, they loved Four.
Yeah, like an OMD.
Yeah.
I guess the opposite of that happened with Oasis, with the third album.
I'll Be Here Now.
Yeah, but that happens every now and then. Either retrospective praise or retroactive, like, praise. It's so strange.
Yeah. But to me, this is easily and I love Zeppelin, but this is easily the best statement from the group. And I can see why, I think it's Robert Christgau once kept claiming that Zeppelin were art rock, although they weren't applied as art rock. But they sound like a hard rock band. They're the hard rock / heavy metal band, I guess, formatively, in a way.
Sure.
I guess obviously Sabbath do some things specific to metal, but, I mean, Zeppelin did things first, in 69. I guess Jeff Beck, too, to be fair. But that's more bluesier, even.
Sure.
Hendrix / Townshend, Clapton, whatever. But, I think the thing is, they were so heavy into the production, like Queen were, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Queen were a hard rock band, but like they're also considered an art rock band. And I think that's why Robert Christgau or someone like him would claim Zeppelin were art rock, is because they had a similar mentality to what Queen would have with how densely heavy on the production they were. And not that bands like Purple or The Who or The Stones weren't heavy on the production, but there was a certain... like, they were clearly just songs that were jammed, that were, rock and roll songs being enhanced versus, like, Zeppelin do, especially around this time, Four and this, there is a very serious art quality. I mean, this is like the bands like Yes, ELP, King Crimson to some extent, Genesis are getting huge around this time, so the Zeppelin, the biggest band in the world, are like, and Pink Floyd, of course, they're like, well, we can do that too. We can, Jimmy Page rewrote some sigils and then they went at it, right?
Like Pink Floyd and like Zeppelin, like you're mentioning here.
73,
I guess people like Christgau, they tied into like art rock or whatever, but less so than like art in the aesthetic sort of pretentious sense.
Or in the art school sense, like Roxy Music.
Or the art school sense. They're more like tech heads if you think about it. It's more about technology than it is about art in the aesthetic sense.
Yeah.
Like, the reason why they focused on production so heavily is because I think they were, like, tech heads, you know?
Yeah.
Except for John Bonham.
I don't know how much Plant was, but, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, I think it's
Lyrics.
it's mostly to do with the technology. Like, yeah, like you mentioned, someone like Deep Purple or even Sabbath in the early days, they're trying to translate their punchy live sound onto a record.
Yeah.
Whereas this album's not trying to translate a live
Yeah.
sound at all.
The engineer behind Deep Purple since in rock was Martin Birch, and as we know from Martin Birch's work with Sabbath and then Maiden, he's not an artist.
No, see,
straightforward.
Maiden production is a great example. Like, that's a very punchy translation of what they would sound like live, just recorded in studio.
Yeah,
you
Martin
know?
Birch, producing the Rainbow Era as well.
As opposed to something like this, like the Rain song or something like that, which is dripping in guitar effects and multi-layered stuff and stereo, you know, channel trickery, and which is generally what depicts art rock in the, you know, taxonomical, in the categorization.
Yeah.
But I think it has more to do with the incorporation of technology rather than like some sort of art school premise or thesis or something like that. Like, say, Roxy Music has.
Yeah.
Or even like
Underground.
downstream of Roxy Music, something like that album. You know, what's the name of that group? They had that album Dare. The synth group, you know.
Human League.
Yeah, the Human League, where like that's trying to be art school and like take the fashion world into its aesthetic, right? I more think of that as being art, whereas this being like more technology. Not to say the like say something like OMD is that as well. It's all about the tech and how the tech can propel the art forward, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what electric music has been good for, you know, even back to the incorporation of the electronic guitar and bass and stuff like that. It's more tech than it is anything else.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose that's where like Led Zeppelin would fit in to art rock or whatever, you know.
Plus is a very album-centric band, not really singles-oriented, and there's great passages about this in the band in general, and Eric Davis's tone to the untitled fourth album, which is one of the best. One of the best books I've ever read by anyone on any topic, really. But Eric Davis is, you know, he's phenomenal.
That's a great book, yeah.
And yeah, like but I mean, Davis himself said his favorite wasn't 4. It was actually I think he said it was either 2 or Physical Graffiti. That's all well and good. But it's all about Houses of the Holy. Eric, you got a trip to this one. I'm sure you have. But I'm all aboard Houses of the Holy. To me, like, this is always like just like it's always just seemed like obvious to me. I get it's also a bit obvious why it's not for everyone else. Like, the major appeal of Led Zeppelin is like people who like play electric guitar. I'm not that kind of guy. I like playing a Casio if it's in front of me. That's where really I'm at, you know. I guess that's why this is my one. I love my Houses of the Holy. And like I said, like, to me, if we're gonna have, you know, a token album from all these big rock groups to put on like an arc or whatever, we're just like, you know, we have to make a great list of these albums, and it's like, oh, let's vary the list up, make it one per artist, make sure it's House of the Holy for Zeppelin. That's where I'm at with it, anyway.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest Zeppelin fan in the world, though I've come to appreciate 4 quite a lot as a sort of interesting production work. The songwriting can fall behind in a few places, but this album improves all the songwriting, and I think they hashed over the songs quite a lot more on this album, and you can kind of tell.
Well, yeah, just as a, like 71 to 73, that's quite a bit of time.
Yeah, and like, you know, you're not the biggest Led Zeppelin fan in the world when like your favorite Led Zeppelin song might be Jamaica.
Wow.
Wow. That's a ridiculously good song. Maybe it's just Bonham's drumming, because it's a great little piece. And the overall design of that song is quite funny. And it's an interesting sort of, you know, in the vein of like the Kinks or like 10cc doing these like quasi-ska reggae songs in the early 70s. It's kind of one of those. And it's funny that Zeppelin have one of those.
Yeah, that is cool, yeah.
And I like it a bit more than the James Brown song. That one's not bad. I just wish it wasn't Robert Plant singing on that song.
Yeah.
You know, I just wish it was someone else. Because all the instrumental is great. But maybe that's my whole thing with Zeppelin in a way. It's just I wish maybe similar to Radiohead. I wish they got a different singer.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works quite well. Sometimes it's just a bit grating, you know. Like sometimes it suits the music almost perfectly, and then other times it's just so, like, you didn't have to go that far, man. With the vocal inflections, it's like I guess that's also a thing that Michael Stipe would do. But I kind of like it when Michael Stipe does that. So it's strange. It's very particular, these sort of things. So that's very like superficial reasoning, but that's why I can get behind something like Houses of the Holy, because I can just put aside my Led Zeppelin prejudice, and that's a hyperbolic way of phrasing it for fun, because they do have a lot of great music, but this is sort of a great, almost the shining light on the hill of their stuff. Though the other stuff is comparably good, at least most of it. Like Physical Graffiti and 2 are great albums. Though 4 is probably my next favourite to this one.
Yeah.
Despite having one of the more overplayed songs in the world.
Yeah, that's very true, yeah. Two of them even.
But this album is just, full of good songs. Like we were talking about earlier, that sort of intimate, like very thorough production that came from just utilising all that they could. And then it's got probably one of their best songs as well, No Quarter.
Oh, it's too good, yeah.
Though like I was saying with I Wish It Was a Different Singer, I want to hear like Big Star's cover of Dancing Days.
Nice.
That would have been a good one. Like it was a nice little like power pop hard rock song.
I was just going to ask just quickly here, as maybe slightly a foreshadowing, but not the biggest Robert Plant fan, as you say, but what about Ian Gillan in Deep Purple?
Yeah, Ian Gillan's got a good voice. Was he the vocalist on that new one? Oh, well, I'll get to it when we get there, funnily enough.
Because, I like Robert Plant, but actually, I don't know if I like Purple or Zeppelin more. It's kind of, I think I like Purple's sound more, but I don't think Purple's, as good as Machine Head and In Rock are, I don't think they're as good as, like, this or 4, for example.
Yeah.
But I love those albums, and they're just like their sound. Like, I'd sooner listen to the Made in Japan live album than any of Zeppelin's live stuff. The Zeppelin live stuff, song remains the same. It's good and whatever, but I love that Made in Japan sound. It's too good. It's like such a cool fucking record.
Yeah.
That Mark II was just killer, obviously. But we'll get to that a bit later, I guess. Somewhat. And so those are my final statements on Led Zeppelin on Mandala for now. And what I do want to say though is, it is one of the groups where at one point I was just really vaguely sick of the group because I felt like fans of the group that I knew weren't giving, other things a chance. Like whether it be something like Cam, Kraftwerk, Slint, and maybe it's throwing out in the deep end, Brian Eno. But I don't know. To me, like I was a Zeppelin fan first, and I got into this other stuff. But as I said, like maybe the fact that Houses of the Holy was my favorite one was a bit of an indicator that the Zeppelin ultimately weren't at the heart of my affair with recorded music. I mean, I eventually got into other bands I got into around that time. I grew to like more, such as The Who. Actually, I think I still like The Who more. So yeah, maybe The Who have definitely better songs. Like The Who have better songs than most rock groups, to be fair. To be totally honest. And Pink Floyd I grew to like a lot more than not only Zeppelin but most music acts ever. It's Pink Floyd, right? And The Doors as well was another one I grew to adore to a large extent. I still love The Doors a lot. And I guess now it's probably time to move on to something which is, that how cool that we were talking about that 2000s moment before post-punk revival, new wave with new wave. Yeah. When that stuff was good, like that, the best stuff in the late 70s and early 80s, when it had that very modernist approach very intellectual approach to those 3 to 4 minute rock/pop tunes, guitar based or sometimes keyboard based, even maybe bass guitar based if it's kind of a funky dub, number, which was common in places like the UK, for example, at least. Anyway, and thinking there was nothing left to be done with it, but the fact that there was so much more to be done was astounding. Imagine how good the bands in the 2000s, when they are pulling it off, because most of them don't, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But sometimes you get examples where it is really pulled off. And I guess you're going to take it away here and discuss one of them.
Yeah.
This one here, the debut album of an interesting group.
Yeah,
which is the
Parade.
group which was, I was insinuating earlier that I always thought, I don't know if they're that similar, but like, I think I listened to albums from Mazzy Star and Wolf Parade at the same time. And
Oh, wow.
Interesting. Like early 21 or something, early-ish.
Yeah, interesting. I can't hear it, but fair enough.
I don't know if that's similar, really. It's just a 90s group and a 2000s group.
Because I guess the one that this band would get compared to at the time was like Modest Mouse.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't realize till recently that fucking half the songs in this album were produced by that guy.
Oh, Brock?
Yeah, funnily enough. I don't know how that happened, but... Oh, no, I did some digging and I think I understood, but... Yeah, I'll get started on the album first. Like, it was funny you mentioned earlier all that stuff about post-rock and the sort of moment of stripping back the edginess of 90s underground or, like, alternative culture and sort of reinterpreting it through this, like, millennial, you know, sort of almost like eschatological lens, you know, trying to sort of like, but also like this album sort of it combines, it comes from that world. It's like these people who, like I guess similar to the hypnagogic thing, they were taking like the songwriting styles and of like what must have been their childhood. Like, you know, you get the feeling that these guys are trying to sort of redo versions of like 70s, like, you know, classic rock and hard rock music, but then like taking those elements but then like sort of siphoning them through the last 20 years of alternative music history. And so you get this great like creative moment briefly where you get an album like this or a few others, you know, like an Interpol album here or there.
Oh, the third one is so brilliant. That's
yeah. Like, there's a few examples of this sort of style of music, but I think this album, the way it, like, sort of shines so brightly is by, like, yeah, it's funny that you brought up, say, Houses of the Holy before this, because it's like that music, that underground alternative music, and, like, you know, restructuring of pop music within the sort of world of indie rock or whatever. It's doing that with the sort of grandiosity of a Led Zeppelin, sort of like all encompassing sort of thematic object, you know. And it's strange that like this album is able to do that just within the limitations of traditional rock instruments, and then like incorporating various like, you know, arty sort of sounding synthesizers and stuff. And then it's just like these two sort of eccentric, very particular songwriters doing their own takes on these structures and stuff. And then no, it's crazy. Like this reminds me of like in the earlier episode, remember where I picked Secession?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like an album I would have listened to years ago, but then I'm like, every now and then I'll listen to it again, but then I listened to it this time, and it was probably the best that it ever sounded, like sort of cohesive as this sort of piece of like an art sentiment or something like that. It's so strange because it's like I when I was listening to it again, I'm just like, I wanted to understand the world where this album came from, because it's just a bit before my time. Like I would have first heard this album in 2013, and it's from 2006, so that's like 7 years.
5 it says actually.
2005, okay. So yeah, it's I was like 8 years late to it, because around that time I wanted to sort of check in on what were the sort of well-regarded bands from this era, because like there was just something dissatisfying to me about the indie rock music from 2013. You know, what's later been, though a review of this album I read actually on the RYM website used the term in 2012, but you know, the landfill indie thing.
Yeah.
And it just, so during the time of landfill indie, like Foster the People and whatnot, and Mumford and Sons, and everyone should know what I'm talking about. Like, it was such a
definitely do. Yeah.
despicable era.
If they're our age, they absolutely do.
Of indie rock music, and so around that time I was going back and trying to listen to all these 90s and 2000s indie rock albums, and there's such a distinction between the two, because like that landfill indie, I think it might be that way because it's just this sort of nondescript background music that it doesn't, like, there's no rock in it. I don't know why they even called it, maybe they went more indie pop in that direction, in the vein of the Shins or something. But like this sort of indie rock music, it like puts hair on your chest, you know, because it is still derived from that post-punk world, and which post-punk, you know, was trying to get back to the spirit of punk, you know, visceral stripped back guitar work, even similar to Led Zeppelin in a way, but before, you know, prog goes a bit too far in the narrative or whatever. Yeah, but so this is like the sort of indie rock that's still in that rock and roll vein, but it had new creative ideas with pop sensibilities to add to, you know, it had new songs, new weird ways of making songs and stuff, and then the way it connects it all in this sort of weirdly, once again, it's another sort of mystical pick. There's this weird sort of like spectral mysticism, like sort of hovering over this album, I feel. At least I definitely, that's what intrigued me about it when I first heard it all those years ago. But definitely listening to it now, it feels like it was, like it's like you listen to it and you're reading somebody else's diary, but it's the headspace that they were in when they were writing it, you know? That's sort of what this evokes in a very strange way. And so I'm just astounded that like an indie rock album can be so intricate in the way people normally attribute to things like Sgt. Pepper's or something like that, you know? And like I said earlier, I did a bit of digging into like this world that this existed, and I realized that like these bands, like a Modest Mouse or a Interpol, or like people will say Arcade Fire alongside Wolf Parade because they're the more popular Canadian band. And I realized that this is from like a bygone era. It's like when fanzines moved to blogs, and how like people kept up with music in the tastemaker sense. Like rather than some guy at the record store, you learn about all these like up and coming young groups that were doing this weird indie rock music from all these blogs and stuff. And then like indie labels and then major labels would sort of scout through these, like this blogosphere, and you have all these bands like Interpol and probably even like the Strokes and shit like that being like uplifted by the blogosphere. And along the way you had like a million different versions of them, like bands like Wolf Parade are sort of the tier just under something like an Interpol or a Modest Mouse that never quite got all that sort of like propulsion. Whereas like I think that I want to sort of see if there's a way, maybe like through the Internet Archive or something, where you can go back and see all these old blogs and see these like albums that were recommended alongside all these ones as like modern classics, but that have just become completely obscure. Because I think that world might exist, like, and it's such a rich world potentially.
I'd imagine
all this like 2000s archaeology of indie rock music that never got the same exposure, you know. Yeah. And this album's sort of the in-between between a bigger band like, say, Interpol and that potential deeper world that might exist in the blogosphere.
Yeah. You know what's really fascinating about this era is there's a certain, and distinct from that kind of moment of the edgy 90s, which I do really like to some extent, depending on what the item is at least.
Sure.
And what I like about this moment, kind of, it's contemporary to what they call the New Sincerity era. And I think it's like, it was this plea for a sense of genuine sentimentality, or like I've criticized the idea of sentimentality on this AOD channel before, but like sentiment rather than sentimentality.
Well, sincerity, like you said.
Yeah. I guess I just don't want to use the word sincerity again.
Sure.
Even though that is a perfect descriptor of this whole world. I don't know if these guys consider themselves new sincerity. And like the edgy 90s, there's things considered new sincerity, which I have shit on this channel before.
No, they were just swept in.
Especially where cinema's concerned. but like Born Back and Michel Gondry and Summer Spike Jones and that sort of thing.
They would like this album is just like once again thematically similar to like we were talking about earlier with like COVID era albums and stuff like that. It's so intrinsically tied into its time in the blogosphere, and like you were saying, the end of an era with rock music sort of thing, because like this album is sort of hauntological in the sense that I think it's like this guy coming to terms with the modern era. Like I think there's even a lyric on this album where it's like, I don't like the modern era, you know. So it's strange that it's sort of, yeah, it feels like a sentiment that was around in the New Sincerity movement that has now become mainstream on the internet.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But back then it was more felt within the sort of underground music and art world, right?
Yeah. I think there was more potential. It feels like there may have been more optimism then than now, because I feel like the internet was a great supplement to outside rather than being kind of a burden to being outside. Like, you know, you couldn't enjoy outside because of social media and you know, just the overarching presence of everything, and just like an omnipotent advertisements and kind of impulses and text messages and things like that, notifications on a smartphone. Whereas like in the 2000s, like it was still just, you know, a matter of, you know, you got to go to a computer in a house. You know, it was equivalent of going to a library almost, more so. So I think that's why there was a feeling of optimism. Like you got positive feelings from the internet more so than intrinsically negative feelings. Like the news is just on the internet now, so all the negative feelings you get from the news were on television and radio and the news and the papers still, and it was easy to avoid. Because you know, just the internet was more, I don't know, user coordinated rather than kind of coordinated by oligarchs and tech giants at that time. Well, the tech giants were still kind of, you know, friendly and hippy dippy. You know, things changed a little bit. But I just want to quickly quote. I don't want to sound too pessimistic here. I'd like to quote the great Bruce Sterling, the one of the popularizers of the term cyberpunk. Not the coiner of the term. That was a different Bruce Bethke. Bruce Sterling has said, if we were naive to be overly optimistic during the dot-com boom of the late 90s and the early 2000s, early 21st century, at the turn of the millennium there, we might be equally naive to be so pessimistic now during this age, during the later 2010s, early 2020s. And I think that's a very wise and sensible phrase that he gifted with us at a talk. You can find that on YouTube somewhere. Maybe if I find it, I'll link it in the description, but I might not remember to. In any instance, I think one of the reasons that the era of groups like Wolf Parade appeals to me is that vague optimism. I think it's best expressed in groups like Animal Collective, possibly. That very psychedelic, you know, that attempt to bring music like that on OMD's Dazzle ships to a sort of mainstream. Maybe they didn't anticipate how mainstream they would become around Strawberry Jams and especially Mary River Post Pavilion. But whatever the instance, it was a very viable movement, which I think, whilst the blogosphere may have been very positive, I think there was a certain potential oversaturation which resulted from the social media era, which was to follow subsequently from that. Yeah, that sort of Animal Collective thing is a good comparison as well, because like, I suppose it's definitely a sincere approach to writing music and to writing pop music, but it's like glazed over with this contemporaneous like, you know, Matrix, the film, like, you know, OK Computer paranoia. Yes, yeah.
Similar to Animal Collective, but yeah, at the same time, it's such a earnest expression of that you feel like it's a real form of songwriting. It's not like some sort of attempt at expressing artifice, you know. Like, unfortunately, some of these groups do fall into every now and then. So, like, you just get this ultimate creative piece, like an album like this, that is perhaps unknowingly just such a detailed portrait of its cultural era, and at the same time being like very out there, interesting rock and pop music. So yeah, like I never thought this album would just keep popping back up in my mind. But there you go, it does. So.
Yeah, well worth it.
Apparently, I read that the name of the album, Apologies to the Queen Mary, comes from them like getting banned from the cruise ship because they were going to play on it, and they like started performing a seance instead. So, like, that's definitely the sort of, it's the out there sort of music that someone like that would make.
Lovely that, yeah. God. Yeah. Relevant, up-to-date music, though also kind of harkening back to a more bygone era, but this stuff feels more contemporary to its time than, I mean, I guess the Oasis stuff in the 90s was like, for what it's worth, and like, Stone Temple Pilots and all that in America, there was contemporary at a time that it was very of its time production and a very distinct production sound, that kind of CD era right after the 80s and right before the more slicker polished for 2000s.
Especially with Oasis, it's the loudness was sound.
Yeah.
The guitar just so heavy in the mix, punching you.
But it does feel like, when you think of like what is the sound of the 90s, what is the distinct sound of the 90s, it's really more Portishead and Massive Attack.
Yeah, sure.
And in the context of America, it's really more the sound of the 90s is Nas and Jay-Z rather than fucking Stone Temple Pilots and fucking Pearl Jam or whatever the heck. But this feels like more of the 2000s than like some sort of just whatever throwback, like something like Oasis is occupying whatever the female pop stars that were still trying to do the 80s thing in the 90s or 80s, just big, like what was it even like, what's the like Celine Dion or whatever, like it's just, I know it's not necessarily 80s pop, but like it's just like there's always just going to be those things there. I don't feel like of the time, they just feel like these staples that are always around for a certain commercial demographic, and that's kind of what Oasis felt like in the sort of like mainstream youth rock context. And whereas this is more of a interesting statement of the era, of that zeitgeist, as far as like rock based music outfits were concerned. And I find it fascinating that a group in 2020, which is the ultimate legacy act, which we were kind of inferring to before, what is it about a group such as Deep Purple, which they create something which, it is a very modern production in 2020, well, in terms of the clarity of the recordings and the instruments, but it's effectively them doing their early 70s Mark II sound again, despite having different band members. Actually, the only band members from the time three of them are from the time. Glover, the bassist, Pace, the drummer, and Gillan, the vocalist. Although Pace is actually the only member who's with Deep Purple from the first album, because of course Gillan and Glover came in on In Rock, the fourth album, when Mark II commenced. And it's amazing. Let's talk about the history of Deep Purple just for a moment, at least my assessment of the group. Just, I feel like it's worth, we need a bit of backstory to get to this one, I honestly think. So, a psychedelic rock act initially of the UK in the later 60s, think downstream of Cream in UK or something like Blue Cheer perhaps in the United States. Blue Cheer maybe a bit earlier, or something transatlantic like Jimi Hendrix Experience. But actually it's worth mentioning, Deep Purple were also a bit similar to a group like The Doors, very organ heavy American group, or Vanilla Fudge. I think Vanilla Fudge American, I'm pretty sure. But if they're British, I feel like I ought to know that. But it's Vanilla Fudge, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that, what's it called? The Atomic Rooster sort of fall into that world as well.
Yeah, that's UK.
Yeah, the UK, yeah.
Yeah, and Vanilla Fudge are American, I was right about that, I guess. And Atomic Rooster are definitely British.
Yeah.
I just wanted to not be wrong about that as well. And also, but yeah, Shades of Deep Purple, 1968, really fantastic. I know Rick Wakeman's listed as one of his top favourite albums ever, which is so fun. No. But love that album, cool new group. And then Book of Taliesin's decent. The third album, Deep Purple, self-titled, really interesting. You got the Hieronymus Bosch kind of crop there. Glorious start, good album. In Rock, we love that. Fireball's good. He is the mule. And he was, I love this kind of bringing references to genre literature into popular rock and roll music, hard rock music, the same year Zeppelin had Battle of Evermore.
They chose Foundation.
Well, Zeppelin did reference Gollum and the Evil One and Ramble On for 2, that's 69 to be fair. And I'm sure a lot of the hippie groups reference Tolkien here and there.
Sure, yeah.
Anyway, Machine Head. We all love Machine Head. It's a classic. It's the staple of this group. It's Who do you think we are? That's when it kind of falls apart a bit in the group. Might we eventually get the dissolution of Mark
That's got the
II?
funniest album cover.
Or it's just the weird...
You know, they're like heads in wine glasses or something.
No, that's a bit later. We'll get to that one.
Okay.
But then Mark III emerges with David Coverdale on vocals and Glenn Hughes on bass and backing vocals. This is, of course, Ian Gillan leaves, Roger Glover leaves with him. Burns quite good. Some people think it's like one of the best or the best Deep Purple album. I like it a lot. Stormbringer I like a lot. Maybe like it even more, to be honest. Then you have Come Taste the Band.
Oh, okay. That's the wine glass one.
Richie Blackmore's gone now, and Tommy Bolin comes in. I'm not the biggest fan of this album, but it's got a lot of champions, and I respect that.
Wow.
I guess. And then we don't get no Deep Purple until the reunion of Mark II, 1984's Perfect Strangers. This was ridiculed as perfect wheelchairs by Kerrang! Magazine then.
Yeah.
Now they're an act from the 70s who are in their 70s.
Yeah.
Or 80s. Devo were in their 70s, so how old are Deep Purple? Perfect Strangers. I'm not the biggest fan of this. It's too commercial rock of this era. I know it's like got a more polished production, and John Lord's the organ. I love John Lord, but House of Blue Light, kind of similar situation. Slaves and Masters in 1990, that's infamous for bringing Joe Lynn Turner from Richie Blackmore's earlier group Rainbow and being effectively a Rainbow album. People aren't too happy with it, I guess. Battle Rage is on 93, that's Mark II again, but it's alright. Excuse me. Deep Purple haven't delivered a real classic since, say, Machine Head, so it's a bit sad. But then it takes 1996 and Steve Morse replacing Richie Blackmore as guitarist are perpendicular to finally reach the heights of the old Mark II or Mark I, and some of Mark III era, I would say. A band on the follow-up in 98, I was never the biggest fan of, it's alright. Bananas in 2003, not a great album, it's enjoyable. Whenever I've listened to it, I thought it was relatively enjoyable though. Rapture of the Deep 2005, I don't know, never found it very memorable. They seem to fall into these patterns where like a band on they try to experiment with some electronics and stuff, like UK electronic music, but it kind of falls flat for me, frankly. And then they go back to basics, I think, on Bananas. It's all worth mentioning, Abandoned is the last of John Lord and Bananas is the first of Don Airey on keys instead. And then, I don't know, maybe they're trying something slightly, I don't even know what on Rapture of the Deep, just more basic rock, and it doesn't work for me. Now What, from 2013 now, harking back to Mark II, kind of, it's, I guess, a slight safe return to form, not as slightly interesting and different as Perpendicular was, but Now What in 2013 was the first one that really, really sounded like the old stuff, and then like the early 70s, and then Infinite in 2017, that seemed like a bit of a misfire to me, and it's like a attempt to these more elaborate songs that are kind of boring and got too many vocals, but also, and that's then the vocal instrumental ratio is not good for like some of this stuff. And then the last song was like a cover of the Doors' Roadhouse Blues. It's very awkward, I think. And then finally, Whoosh in 2020 is, along with Perpendicular, that 1996 album, it's the finest thing in this Morse era, and the Deep Purple album that is potentially worth mentioning in some respects, along with the likes of Machine Head, Deep Purple and Rock, shades of Deep Purple. I really quite love Whoosh because of the production. Bob Ezrin's been with this band since, I think, Now What in 2013. He did a great job on Now What. He's done his job, he's okay on Infinity. The Whoosh, absolutely love it. I think it's worth mentioning the band's performance, which Ian Gillan is alright. Like it's you can only expect so much. It's better than you would expect because you're not expecting very much. It's serviceable at least, but the rest of the band do a fantastic job. And to me, if you just wanted another Deep Purple album or a totem to where a group is very creative yet unpretentious and kind of really doing their old thing without being ashamed of it, while still thinking there's some creative work to be done within it, and without it being too formulaic or forced, like Black Sabbath's kind of not necessary 13 album, for example.
This album doesn't fall into formulaic at all. It feels very creative, funnily enough.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's one of the best albums of 2020, but I would say it's one of the maybe better albums of 2020. Big fan of Deep Purple's Whoosh. When I heard it, I was just like, wow, this is really quite good for what it is. And hearing it a few times since, because I've been trying to explore the Morse era a little bit more over this 2020s decade so far, and I've come to really like Perpendicular and Whoosh. And I remember I heard Now What in 2013 around the time it came out, and I thought it was fairly good. I still think it's fairly good. Perpendicular and Whoosh especially, those are the ones. Do you have any thoughts to share on this particular one now?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty surprised. I was kind of taken aback. I didn't think I would enjoy a Deep Purple album from 2020 so much, Like, it's funny, you mentioned Kerrang said in 1984 they're in wheelchairs. But, like, I guess that's a testament to their, like, sort of creativity as a group, or at least as a creative project for the most part. Because, it's interesting you said Bob Ezrin as well. Like, the thing that sort of was most enjoyable about this album is that, like, rather than some sort of contemporary band trying to do a retrospective take on 70s hard rock, you had, like, people from the time doing it, but, like, did it within the sort of, for them, I suppose, restrictions of digital production, but they were able to get the same, like, tonage out of the guitar and stuff, that same sort of 70s hard rock sound, where it didn't sound like it was just, like, it didn't have that sort of glaze of digital electronic guitar. It sounded like it was recorded more traditionally, but then it was able to mix that in with, like, the drumming sounded like it was off, like, a contemporary metal album. It had that very, like, punchy digital drumming that just you couldn't get back then. But then, like, was able to mix that in so well with Ian Gillan's heavily affected vocals. But then all these, like, tinges of strange, like, guitar effects and sort of just effects in general. Like, this album, it had a strange, like, psychedelic tinge to it.
Yeah.
You'd think more like space rock because of the album cover, but to me it felt more like psychedelic.
Well, that's their very roots at the end. Even though the band is mostly different, except for pace since then.
Yeah, like when you were talking about Mark 1, I was thinking about this album, and it was like a cool combination of Mark 2 and Mark 1. Just little tinges of Mark 1.
I'm not sure if you noticed, perhaps you may have, the second last track, well, actually the last track, Dancing in My Sleep, that's actually technically a bonus track, but before that is an instrumental and the address. That was a remake of the first track on Shades of Deep Purple, the 4-minute instrumental and the address.
Nice.
So they come full circle.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, because, like, the psychedelic touches to this album are what really put it over the edge as, like, super creative songwriting and production, because, like, there are a few tracks on the album that succeed as, like, hard rockers or whatever, with the sort of visceral propulsion that they have. But sometimes will fall into, like, a bit of the banal school of hard rock songwriting.
Oh, sure, yeah. It is what it is,
But it goes beyond that because of all its, like, sort of psychedelic touches and things like that. Though, like you brought up Ian Gillan's singing performance earlier, funnily enough, the whole time I was like, man, I wish Dio was singing this. Because I think his style would have suited, like, the hard rockers quite well. Though maybe not the psychedelic stuff as much, but
yeah, that's true.
I didn't think it was Ian Gillan. I thought it was maybe even someone else.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because I guess he has a shout. He just couldn't sustain it over so many years. But yeah, no, this album is ridiculously good when you set the context, the sort of lineage of Deep Purple albums. When you viewed, like maybe if you played it for someone who didn't know it was Deep Purple, who was into that sort of music, they'd be like, oh, this is a cool new band, I guess. And then you just be like, oh, it's Deep Purple, and it's like, wait, the Machine Head Band? So that's probably the most interesting thing even about this album, is that, like, people who were considered part of this, like, cultural movement that's now, like, 50 years old can still use that paradigm to make interesting music. It's not, like, worn out or, like even that more recent Jethro Tull album,
Oh, the Delagene?
Yeah.
I thought that was
I'm not the biggest.
decent to pretty good.
I'm not the biggest Tull fan in the world, but like when I listen to that album, I'm just like, man, it sounds like Ian Anderson's like worn out. Not just the vocal performance, but like the music as well. And as far as like, it just feels like he's just going through the motions or something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this album feels like they were like really onto, for them, new creative territory, you know. And so, like it's just a fucking fun listen, you know. Especially if you're a fan of Deep Purple and like keyboard driven hard rock.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that like puts this album over the edge as well, is it's like emphasis on sort of whacked out, sometimes proggy, but mostly like psychedelic key work.
Don Airy, good stuff.
Yeah, no, it's very good. And like I mentioned Atomic Rooster before, I much prefer that end of hard rock that's driven by keys.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah.
Because it's just
generally speaking, I would say
something about the like the organ sound of that. When it can interweave with the guitar, it creates more of a sort of hectic atmosphere than just purely guitar, like overdrive stuff. Can be a bit like tiresome in comparison. Like No Quarter from Houses of the Holy is a good example. Houses of the Holy in general, the way it'll blend like Mellotron in is very good. And so this album's like a contemporary example of that.
Yeah.
And it's definitely worth a listen. 2020 Deep Purple, who would have known?
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate they would follow this up with a blues rock thing.
Yeah, like a cover album, right?
It's terrible. I haven't heard it, but like I'm sure people did lambast it. It's interesting that I mentioned Black Sabbath 13. Apparently Black Sabbath wanted to do another final album, which is a return to the blues rock thing, because they were a blues rock band called Earth prior to being Black Sabbath, and they wanted to bring it full circle.
Oh, wow.
Like with 13, and they kind of done, but it's like, oh no, actually we're going to bring it really full circle, but they didn't end up doing that, fortunately. I don't think they ever will. But Deep Purple actually did it. But apparently, I've heard from somehow that there's another Deep Purple album in the works. They have a new guitarist now. Steve Morse has left for personal reasons in his family, sadly. But then apparently the new guitarist has been doing well. People seem to like him, and I think they want to put him on a record. So
yeah, nice.
And if they've got a potentially new voice/songwriter in the band, that might be helpful.
Sure,
Even if the other, like, he might have ideas that the other guys can effectively bounce off of, like they have been with Morse since, like, and / Airy, Morse since 96 and Airy since 2003, / Ezra since 2013.
Yeah.
Who's the kind of producer who effectively becomes a member of the band, I think.
Sure.
He has a reputation, at least.
Yeah,
historically, in the rock acts that he sort of worked with.
Yeah. He'll be like, oh, Peter Gabriel, I'm going to put a 70s hard rock guitar solo over your song. So yeah, definitely.
Oh man, yeah, wow, yeah. Good things to say about Deep Purple here in 2020. Who would have thought? And this album actually did, from when I look, it did seem to get good reviews, even from the likes of the Pitchfork, also known as GQ, kind of crowd enemy. They were reviewing it.
So, the enemy as well.
I think you went to Wikipedia and those bands, for what it is, this kind of music, and it's like, yeah, why not, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, partly helps that, like, some of these, British publications, Deep Purple are a staple over there, and I think they serve a certain fondness for Purple.
And it is just good music, this album, yeah. Removed from the context of Deep Purple, you just think, fuck, this is some good stuff.
What's interesting is that Purple, Queen became an American institution in a way, and Zeppelin did too, but Purple, outside of Smoke on the Water, never did.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a way that's, Purple's still ours sort of thing.
Sure.
I don't know, I could be being silly with that.
No, it could be. Though some Americans might stake claim to Deep Purple.
Oh, they would, but, like, even those Americans would know, like, Purple were more of a one-hit wonder over in America, and the American fans are kind of disappointed about that.
Sure,
I've heard them say that before.
Okay.
So, I don't know, there's a thing there. But yeah, God, like, I wish, again, like, who would have thought you can have something like this in one of these legacy rock acts? But here we are, and I don't mind, like, who's putting out new good music, as long as it is, as I said, fairly good. I'm very, very happy that these people who are alleged to be dinosaurs can still roar and stomp with the best of them.
Oh, at this point, they're not even dinosaurs. They're more...
reanimated fossils?
No, I'm thinking even further back, because reanimated fossils would be contemporary. They're more like the amino acid goop that is the pre-cellular life.
I wouldn't go that far. I'd just say they're more the certain reptiles of the Triassic period, which weren't quite dinosaurs. I don't think like the Dimetrodon is technically considered a dinosaur. You know, the guy he's like a lizard, except he's got a big kind of spine on his back. Yeah, I like the Dimetrodon quite a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that one's a classic.
Yeah, he's great. But I don't think he's technically a dinosaur. I could be wrong because he doesn't have the particular hip bone.
Sure.
Let me just quickly check this. This is going to be the final discussion point here on Mandala. Is the music show is Dimetrodon considered a dinosaur?
All I know is that
non-mammalian synapsid.
Yeah.
I think synapsids are not dinosaurs.
Also, if you're still listening, sign our petition to start a band called the Synapsids.
That's a great idea. All right,
Join in, people.
That's a thank you, everyone. Have a great day, night, wherever you are.
Yeah.
Thanks again.